Ever since human beings started walking the planet, we've been predicting on how we might get wiped out. Today we're bringing the destruction right into your very home, so sit back and relax as we talk about massive earthquakes, deadly viruses, and the end of human civilization as we know it.
We're going to be starting things off with the collapsing of the internet. Now, obviously, Nostradamus lived a very long time ago. He did not literally come out and say to everybody, like, the internet will crumble before thee in the year of our Lord of 2024. And everyone would just be staring at him blankly, like, what? What are you talking? What is the internet? What are you on about, Grandpa? You should not be allowed to live on your own. Back to the home. This obviously made more of a vague prediction that people have looked into, and some would say severely overanalyzed, but it's fun to talk about this stuff, so deal with it. As for why the internet could collapse in the very near future, tons of possibilities. We're watching the rise of AI right now, which a lot of people are seeing as a very real threat to humanity. So could AI actually become intelligent enough to take over the internet, then become sentient enough to realize just how harmful it could be to us and decide to just shut itself off? Who knows, right? It's possible. If that happened, we'd be pretty screwed. We've kind of grown to rely pretty heavily on the World Wide Web.
Next on the list, we have a rise of a deadly virus or disease. Ain't that a word that makes you want to puke? Ever since the whole 2020 pandemic, illnesses, diseases, they've been on the forefront of a lot of people's minds. And luckily, things didn't go as badly as some people were saying they could, but what if there's something far worse looming on the horizon? Yeah, what if? I always hate when people say stuff like that. Oh, well, it could be always something worse, you never know. We could all be screwed. It's like, all right, what am I supposed to do about it? I'm not a doctor. I'm just a whatever the heck I am doing right now. Anyway, just don't shoot the messenger, folks. I'm just saying that there are a lot of predictions of mass virus or disease that could wipe us out. And will it happen? I don't know, just wash your hands.
Let's discuss my preferred way to go out, that being with an alien invasion. This is another one of those predictions, or I'm kind of like, how have aliens been pulled out of this ancient dead man's predictions? Earthquakes, famine, disease, those are very biblical catastrophes. Aliens, a little more contemporary, but this dude was apparently a wizard, so he was seeing stuff he couldn't even fathom. That's how cool Nostradamus was. Nostradamus, more like Nostradam us. And by damn, I mean damn us, literally, because he had a lot of negative stuff to say, apparently. Was this dude ever positive about anything? Anyways, aliens, they've been in the news a lot lately. We got sightings happening all over the world. The US government is having big meetings about them. They're really causing a stir. So could 2024 be the year they finally make their big debut on Earth and then punch us all to death? It's possible, and yeah, I hope this is the way we all go out. I don't want to die getting hit by an asteroid, because then it's just like lights out instantly. You don't really get to do anything. I don't want to get sick from some gross illness, because that's gross. I want to die with an alien probe shoved into me with a futuristic rifle in my hand on a hill of dead alien body parts that I've severed in battle. That's a man's way to go out right there.
All right, speaking of asteroids, we have the asteroid impact. Now, one of the Oracle of Doom's more ambiguous predictions for 2024 includes something he quite vaguely describes as a celestial wave of death from the heavens to smite the earth and all its inhabitants. Now, unless God himself decides to start zapping lightning, something more probable and grounded in reality which could explain this death from above scenario could be an asteroid smashing into Earth. Yeah, a big old rock from space hurling towards us and bam! Catastrophic impact. See, there's loads of these asteroids cruising near Earth, and despite all of our eyes pointed towards the skies, we simply can't spot them all. As a matter of fact, scientists can only detect a fraction of the rocks in space, because our current systems for spotting incoming objects rely on a bunch of factors lining up perfectly. Things like the direction the object is coming from compared to the sun, what the weather is like, and even what phase the moon is in. And guess what? Because of all these factors, the success rate for spotting these things isn't great, around 1%. And here's the kicker. It's even worse when it comes to spotting smaller objects. So basically, it's like trying to find a needle in a cosmic haystack, and most of the time we're just not that good at it. Imagine if one of these rocks decides to take a pit stop on our planet without sending so much as a postcard first. Bam! Catastrophe! Nostradamus might not have been a scientist, but his predictions about this kind of stuff are spooky when you really think about it. So yeah, keep an eye on the sky, because you never know when an uninvited cosmic rock might crash our party.
Alright, next up, we have a massive earthquake. How fun. Old Nostradamus made a prediction that later in 2024, a horrendous earthquake will hit Japan. In fact, a cataclysmic earthquake. This will be said to prompt a massive tsunami that will of course cause even more widespread destruction. An even bigger earthquake is said to hit the United States, affecting the western area of the country. It will apparently be so powerful that it'll be felt in other parts of the world. So not great news, and I say news, again, these are very vague predictions, folks. Emphasis on the prediction part. So take it with a grain of salt. I think most of our American and Japanese audience is gonna live through the year just fine, depending, of course, on your age and other factors not related to earthquakes, of course.
Next up is cosmic death from above. Backtracking to my point from earlier, rocks in space isn't the only thing that could explain this celestial death from above.
As a matter of fact, one explanation that might fit better with Nostradamus's predictions is a cosmic ray, either a beam emitted from a distant supernova or a gamma ray burst.
The end of the world could come about as the result of a nearby star exploding or shooting a gamma ray burst our way.
Now, cosmic events like these aren't exactly uncommon, and a cosmic beam hitting our planet from such a distance would need to be a shot so precise that it would make the American sniper blush. So what's the big deal?
Well, in the extremely unlikely scenario where one of these rays does come down and hit us, it'll be like someone tearing off the Earth's sunscreen, that's our ozone layer, and exposing us to some serious cosmic rays.
So imagine our atmosphere gets zapped and radiation starts like pouring in. That's bad news for life as we know it.
The radiation could mess up ecosystems, fry electronics, and cause a mass extinction event.
So, while Nostradamus was kind of cryptic with his predictions, this one's a doozy if it happens. It'd be a cosmic disaster of nightmarish proportions.
Yeah, now heavenly lightning strikes doesn't sound so bad anymore, does it?
Alright, the next way we might all meet our doom in 2024 is from a super volcanic eruption.
Now, volcanoes are scary for multiple reasons. First, there's the lava.
Even kids know how scary lava is. Do you ever play The Floor is Lava?
I mean, you play that game knowing that if you touch the floor, you're not just gonna lose the game. You gotta pretend that you're dead.
Yeah, if you play it right. So, we got lava, big volcano erupts, everyone around it gets engulfed in lava, and then they burn to death.
Great for them, but I know what you're thinking. How could a volcano destroy the entire planet? I mean, there's no volcano big enough to spew enough lava to destroy us all.
Like, where is this Ron Jeremy volcano you speak of?
Well, folks, it's not just the lava you gotta worry about, it's the ash.
Now, I know we've messed around a lot during this list so far, but volcanic ash has been known to cause exceptionally cold stretches, some lasting possibly hundreds and hundreds of years. Take the Little Ice Age, which occurred between the 14th and 19th centuries, where it was exceptionally cold throughout most of Europe.
This is believed to have been caused by a high number of volcanic eruptions that spewed out sun-blocking particles into the atmosphere.
It's a thing. Look it up.
Speaking of which, we have global freezing up next. Remember the premise of the movie Snowpiercer, where in order to combat global warming, the United Nations releases a chemical that actually triggers an ice age?
That's basically what this prediction was all about in a nutshell. Now, it wasn't spelled out like that so clearly. Again, he wasn't exactly like, hey folks, like get your mittens ready because it's gonna get chilly. But some folks have taken his writings and correlated it to real science, concluding if there's a big spike in this stuff called aerosol in the air, it could cool things down massively.
Allow me to explain. Aerosols are chemical compounds that can come from lots of places, like natural stuff like dust, sea spray, or even particles of volcanoes when they erupt. However, these occurrences, except for the volcanoes, aren't quite enough to induce climate change. However, human activities also produce aerosols.
Things like burning fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas, industrial processes, and even some sprays that we use like hairspray or spray paint releases aerosols into the air. air.
And if those cooling particles hang around for a while and accumulate, it might just kickstart an ice age, turning the thermostat way down, but like for the entire planet.
So whether the next ice age comes as a result of aerosols or, God forbid, nuclear winter, don't pawn away your winter jackets and mittens just yet.
Next up, let's lighten the mood a little bit with something that could be good.
Not too good, because this is an end of the world list after all, so this could also be bad, but we'll explain.
Old Nostradamus predicted that the rise of medicine and technology will cause humans to live longer, possibly up to 150 or even 2 centuries old.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. Think of all the stuff you could do in a lifetime if you could live that long, AJ.
Yeah, plus I don't want to die. I hate talking about the world ending. This list makes me quite unhappy.
As much as we don't want to do it, we gotta look at the dark side of this prediction.
You can probably guess where we're gonna go with this. More people living longer and longer could put a strain on, well, just about everything.
Not just natural resources, but jobs. Think of the jobs. There are already more people on the planet than there are jobs. What the hell are all these 165-year-old people gonna be doing? Lounging around, ordering mimosas, while all the hot young 80-year-olds like rush around, serving their every whim?
Or on the flip side, will all the young people be out of work while the high-paying, hard-to-get-to positions are hoarded by the old guard? Could spell disaster.
Nostradamus also predicted that a man-made superweapon would annihilate all the inhabitants of Earth, predicting the production of the thermonuclear bomb.
But as you've seen, only half that prediction has come true. What if 2024 is finally the year that the latter half of his prediction comes true, that being the end of all humanity via this device?
Global nuclear conflict leading to a full-scale nuclear war could result in devastating consequences, including widespread destruction, nuclear winter, and long-term environmental hazards, potentially rendering the planet uninhabitable for humans and many other species.
Now, for as much as I want to believe that this isn't going to happen, the fact is humans haven't gotten any more peaceful. Right now there's the war in Ukraine, the whole tension between China and Taiwan, not to mention the ongoing struggles in Palestine.
At this point, it's very possible that any of these wars could escalate into something much worse on a scale that we haven't seen since the nukes were first dropped.
Anonymous has been challenging higher powers for over a decade.
And if their predictions for 2024 are correct, then this will be the year that the powers that be crumble to the might of the collective.
These are the top 10 scary 2024 end of world predictions made by Anonymous.
Internet censorship. Anonymous has a bone to pick with censorship, and just recently, Canada has passed this Online Streaming Act in 2022, a law which could effectively be used to control what we see online. Which doesn't sound like a doomsday scenario at first glance, but just wait till I get into it. See, the thing is, this act talks about removing internet content considered harmful, such as misleading political communications and propaganda. But what qualifies as propaganda, and who gets to make that call? Anonymous is concerned that this vagueness will give the government too much power to decide what's okay for us to see. It's easy to envision a scenario where this act can be leveraged by the government in power to silence and suppress political opposition or present a curated worldview to its citizens. A dystopian notion, to be sure. This is a big deal because the fact that they could use this to shadow ban voices they don't like or control what narratives we're exposed to will surely lead to a breakdown of democracy. Anonymous is known for targeting organizations and governments they perceive as restricting online freedom, so it's only a matter of time before they start firing back with a little something called cyber warfare.
The year 2022 was a big one for them, considering they managed to hack into different governments across the world, including Australia, where they leaked 82 gigabytes worth of emails that exposed the police protesting the detention of refugees. In Australia, they have a law in place where they can detain someone who isn't a citizen if suspected of violating the terms of their visa or not having a valid visa. So for them to be ignoring the mass amounts of emails is more than concerning for people trying to enter the country. But that's not all. They also hacked the Russian government as retaliation for their invasion of Ukraine. They blasted Ukrainian culture like flags, symbols, shows, and other parts of the culture across broadcast TV shows and radio stations. So not only did they have a hand in predicting how much is really controlled by the government, but they also exposed how far the government is willing to go in order to keep their plans from being exposed.
If you're enjoying the video so far, you could support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Most Amazing, and ringing that notification bell. Next up, we have cyber warfare. Anonymous is gearing up to cause some serious trouble this year through cyber warfare in an attempt to cause a government shutdown and collapse of the nation as we know it. But how will they go about this, you ask? Well, there are a number of different routes they could take. In the past, they've leveraged the gaps in cybersecurity, obtaining all kinds of personal information on government employees like their names, addresses, phone numbers, social insurance numbers, heck, even credit card details, leaking it all to the public, with some even going as far as using those details to make vast donations to different charities. But this is definitely the easiest and least damaging thing they could do. The hacker group is so effective that even the president considers Anonymous a potential threat to national security, as they've got the capability to disable entire parts of the US power grid. Imagine your whole government, nay, your whole country, suddenly hitting the rewind button on technological advancement. No lights, no Wi-Fi, no TV, nada. That's just the start. Everything that relies on power starts working, just like your fridge, your toast, no more cold milk or ice cream. Computers are as dead as a doornail. Your phone, well, unless it's charged up, it's just a fancy paperweight now. Businesses shut down, hospitals struggle, and transportation grinds to a halt. No heating or cooling systems, no running water if you're on a well pump. It's like taking a step back into time when life was way less convenient. Then people start worrying about food going bad, staying warm. Heck, some might even get anxious about security because without power, security systems are going to be down and first responders are going to be hard to reach unless you're planning on sending a freaking messenger pigeon. So, yeah, doomsday coming up.
Following that up, we have practicing Scientology. The Church of Scientology believes in finding self-knowledge and spiritual fulfillment through studying and training, and they believe that the body holds powers and abilities that can only be achieved after one has found one's true self. Well, in January of 2008, Anonymous released a video interview with Tom Cruise, who was still practicing Scientology. The church did not like this and filed a copyright claim because it was leaked without their permission. But if they aren't doing anything wrong, then what do they have to hide? Well, the video was taken down, and this was when Anonymous created Project Chantology, which protests the act of Scientology and actively sent them prank calls, faux emails, and blacked out faxes. They continued to protest in person outside of Scientology facilities as well, to get them to stop censoring free speech and free will, because the rules of Scientology are very strict and almost cult-like. For example, the disconnect policy entails that a person who is practicing must remove everyone from their lives who are being antagonistic towards Scientology. What the real unseen dangers of Scientology are, we'll never know, but if it was bad enough for Anonymous to get involved, it may be best to steer clear of the practice.
If Anonymous has an ultimate goal besides, destabilizing nations for the lulz, of course, then they'd like to establish an anarchist nation following the collapse and abolition of the government. So how would this country be run according to Anonymous? Well, instead of big bosses telling everybody what to do, decisions would be made collectively by the folks living in the community. Cooperation would be key, as people would help each other out with everything from growing food to looking after each other's health and education. And nobody would be pushed into boxes based on who they are. Everyone could live as they pleased without anyone trying to control them. No more top-down structures, just fairness and equality. Conflicts wouldn't be dragged into courts, instead communities would band together and find solutions to patch things up. And money, well, that might not be a big deal anymore, as people trade stuff they have or just help each other without expecting something in return. Communities might even set up their own economies, focusing on what's good for everyone instead of focusing on, profit margins. Now, it wouldn't all be rainbows and sunshine. Figuring out how to keep things organized and safe without a big government conglomerate would be tricky, but in this world, people would be free to try new things and ways of doing things, experiment with different setups, and adapt to whatever comes their way. It seems like anarchy isn't as bad as it's made out to be, in theory at least.
While it may not be the end of the world, they have been exposing unethical police attacks since the 2010s. Some of these instances included them posting a video warning Mike Ferguson, the Missouri police officer who claimed the life of an unnamed African-American teenager, the Missouri political team, and the local police that if any other protesters were harmed, they would take action. Well, the chief of police called their threats hollow and refused to release the name of the officer who committed the crime. Well, they they acted fast, doxing his home address, the names of his family, friends, and loved ones, and all their social media accounts, as well as his personal phone number. The same thing happened to the Hong Kong government, where they said that if any of the protesters were harmed, they would take drastic measures, including hacking all the government web bases. Instead of the government stopping, however, they just boosted their security as fast as possible and continued to harass protesters. In order to keep their own security safe, they jeopardized the lives of thousands.
Now, given that the hacker group quite literally relies on anonymity, hence the freaking name, it's no surprise that the collective is worried about surveillance going into 2024. Governments and big companies are getting increasingly snoopy, doing all kinds of shady things like watching and tracking your moves, and not just online in an attempt to hoard your information and sell you crap. I'm talking about biometric tech that allows CCTV to recognize you without even needing to see your face. Heck, even Wi-Fi modems have the capability to detect physical movements through walls by monitoring how Wi-Fi signals bounce off of you. You would think that this kind of thing only happens in dictatorship countries, but it's happening everywhere, and that's got the hacktivist group all fired up. See, all this surveillance isn't just about preventing crime or keeping things safe, it's a direct threat to your privacy and freedom. All the more reason to take out the power grid, so be prepared.
Following that, we have the amount of trading on the dark web. The dark web has got its name for a reason. Many different forms of shady deals go on there on many different platforms. Some might get into it through curiosity, while others use it for malicious intent. In February of 2017, a message popped up on over 10,000 Tor-based websites that said, "Hello Freedom Hosting 2, you have been hacked." Freedom Hosting 2 was essentially an internet gate that was for hosting websites only accessible through Tor. Anonymous stole 75 gigabytes worth of files and almost 3 worth of database information, a lot of which was worthy of arrest and imprisonment. According to Sarah Jamie Lewis, a privacy researcher, Freedom Hosting 2 was responsible for almost 20% of the information contained on the dark web. The fact that they can run such a wide network and not be found out for such awful criminal activity proves how dangerous it can really be and how it can really affect a person's daily life.
Next on the list, let's talk about Operation Avenge Assange. Julian Assange, the brains behind WikiLeaks, created this platform that was sort of like a Pandora's box, but instead of unleashing evils, it spilled out classified documents from governments and big corporations. In 2010, WikiLeaks dropped a bombshell by publishing a boatload of classified US military documents thanks to Chelsea Manning, a former intelligence analyst for the US Army. These documents exposed some seriously terrifying stuff. I'm talking war crimes like the ill treatment of detainees, civilian casualties, friendly fire incidents, and the list just goes on and on. Now, seeing as the government didn't want Julian Assange to air out their dirty laundry, they did everything they could to throw the book at him and lock him away, going as far as even inventing new laws after the fact in order to prosecute him. To say that the US government was gunning for him is a vast understatement. And they didn't just do so through courts. They attacked him at every angle possible, even forcing Amazon to boot WikiLeaks from its online servers and getting PayPal, MasterCard, and Visa to cut off service from his organization, so he could no longer earn donations. And that's when Anonymous striked back. They launched a denial of service, or DDoS attack, against organizations that cut ties with WikiLeaks. Anonymous declared these actions as part of their advocacy for free speech and transparency, standing in solidarity with WikiLeaks against what was clearly government censorship.
And for our last point, we have social unrest and protests. According to Anon, while they certainly have the power to engage in cyber warfare and ignite the collapse of entire nations, they don't think they'll need to go that far of an extreme for their anarchist principles to be put into the effect worldwide. As the global economy begins to grow more and more unstable, and with governments and corporations becoming more transparent with their corrupt tendencies, social tensions, and protests are escalating across the globe, and the hacktivist group believes this trend of civil unrest, sparked by various socio-political issues and economic disparities, will only get louder in 2024. And the more the government attempts to suppress knowledge of these collisions of individuals rising up against conglomerates, the harder Anonymous will work to ensure these voices are heard. So let this be a warning to the bigwigs who think they can control everything. One way or another, anarchy is coming.
For a guy who lived over a millennium ago, his predictions for our present era are terrifyingly accurate.
If just one of these predictions happens to come true, humanity is totally doomed.
So here are the top 10 scary 2024 end of the world predictions.
Made by Nostradamus, Part 3. First up is the Son of Man. Believe it or not, this dude from over 500 years ago actually predicted the rise and takeover of artificial intelligence. Now, many Nostradamus prophecies require you to read in between the lines a bit, seeing as the dude was attempting to describe things that would happen centuries later. Like, imagine trying to describe AI without even knowing what a computer is. But given the context of AI, his prediction becomes a whole lot less cryptic. In his passage, the Prophet of Doom describes how humans play God, attempting to create a being in our own image, one made not of flesh. He goes on to say that this unholy Son of Man will surpass its creators in all things, wielding an unseen influence which shall usurp the mantle of governments from their makers, casting a shadow on the destiny of humanity. Now listen to that passage again and just try to tell me that he's not talking about freaking artificial intelligence. Like, it's pretty incredible.
Next up, we have an encounter with a rogue black hole. Black holes are incredibly mysterious and fascinating, but from a distance, right? If one happened to show up anywhere near us, we'd pretty much be helpless. They gobble up everything that comes too close, even light itself. So what if Earth got a bit too cozy with one? It's not a pleasant picture. First off, a black hole's gravity is crazy strong. It just pulls everything in. And once you're in, there's no coming back. At least that's what seems to happen. We really don't know where things end up when they get sucked in. Now, the real chaos happens before we actually get sucked in, though. As we get closer to a black hole, the gravitational forces start messing with everything. Tides would go bonkers, weather patterns would be completely out of whack, everything would be in complete chaos. Then Earth would start getting stretched like spaghetti, and once we pass the point of no return, we'd be gone. We have yet to develop anti-black hole gravitational pull technology.
Next up, we have seismic activity and sinkholes. Now, we already discussed crazy things like huge earthquakes in part 1 of this series. Definitely check that one out if you haven't already. But one detail I neglected to mention was how he described the very ground beneath our feet swallowing everything up, with entire nations plummeting down into the pits of the abyss. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, that sounds a lot like he's describing sinkholes on a scale we've never seen before. Now, sinkholes appear spontaneously in nature because underground there are layers of rock and soil, and sometimes these layers can dissolve or get worn away by water. Imagine like a big rock candy getting smaller as you lick it. That's basically what's going on underneath us. When water seeps through the ground, it can dissolve certain types of rock, like limestone, and over time, this makes spaces and gaps underground. And if there's a lot of water, or if the ground above gets really heavy, those spaces can collapse, causing a sinkhole. Sometimes even human activities like mining, drilling, or heavy construction can mess with the underground and trigger sinkholes. Now imagine massive sinkholes opening up suddenly, consuming entire cities. Yeah, not just tiny gaps in the road here. What if they were monstrous, devouring entire countries even? I mean, how could a sinkhole of these proportions happen? Well, you may have heard that recently Finland built an entire underground city, and Elon Musk plans to drill tunnels under Los Angeles for highways. Perhaps these man-made projects could fail, sending the entire city above into freefall. Okay, maybe not a nation-sized sinkhole, but still unfathomably huge.
2024 is also supposed to see an extreme power shift in Europe, and this extreme and sudden shift could spell disaster. Of course, these predictions are always vague, so it's not like there were any particular names used, but it is hinted at that a major political leader will be taken out by someone in his very own country. This will then lead to a big political shift that will affect the entire continent. And based on the title of this video, you could probably imagine that this power shift wouldn't be positive. Try a total collapse of the economy that will lead to many Europeans becoming displaced. So I'm not sure how many European viewers we have, but it looks like in the coming months, there may be a lot less of you because you'll be too poor to afford the internet anymore. And some of you may have to actually sell your computers for bread and water, and you'll be in one of those long lines where everyone's crying, "Oh, I'm hungry." I'm sorry, don't shoot the messenger. This is just what I've heard.
Next up, cybernetic enhancements are the mark of the beast. Back in the day, folks were all about spirituality. So what was highest was spiritual in heaven, and what was lowest had to be the material realm. Now, one of his predictions had to do with humans sacrificing what's highest, aka our spirituality, in favor of what's lowest, the material. Now, at first glance, you might think that he's trying to describe humanity's gradual disconnect with faith in favor of materialism, as we've seemed to replace God with Gucci. But read a little deeper and he may not just be talking about vanity. He describes a process in which mankind actually integrates itself with the material, sacrificing spirituality itself for a perceived strength. He said that those who did not receive the mark of the material blasphemy would simply not be able to compete with his fellow man. Now, the way I interpret it, personally, it sounds to me like he's attempting to describe cybernetics, kind of like how Elon Musk is developing Neuralink, which is basically a computer chip that puts the tech of your phone in your brain. I mean, just think about it. If I've got a calculator in my noggin, I could totally outperform all of y'all in anything, at least academically speaking, so it translates really well. As a matter of fact, pretty soon you might be able to transplant my entire head onto a lab-grown athlete bod, so I mean, that's pretty exciting.
Next on the list, we have the bird virus. So we talked about the potential for a world-ending virus to rear its ugly head in the coming year for human beings, but what if there was one that started spreading across another part of the food chain? Birds play a pretty important role in the ecosystem. They help control pests, they spread seeds around, and without birds, what would bird watchers do with their lives? So, if a nasty virus hits our flying friends and starts wiping them out, this would set off a chain reaction throughout the entire food chain, which of course goes all the way up to us. And most importantly, if the bird population drops, there'd be so many bugs, the birdies, they wouldn't be around to keep them in check, right? And birds eat plants, and that could mess with our crops and gardens. Less birds also means less seed spreading action, and that could also mess with the growth of plants. And let's not forget about the whole predator-prey thing. Birds have their own set of predators, like hawks or cats. Hawks are birds, so I don't know why I included that in there. But if bird numbers drop, it could throw off the balance, and some of those predators might start disrupting other parts of the ecosystem in search of food.
Next up, escaping the Earth. Now, Nostradamus predicted that by this year, the only ones who would be saved from the Earth's doomed fate would be the kings in cahoots with the devil, who has bestowed upon him the means to literally sprout wings and escape into the heavens. I mean, these are all metaphors, so we're not literally going Icarus mode. But you guys at home probably came to the same conclusion as I did with this one, as I'm sure this dude is talking about how the rich and powerful are planning on being shuttled off to Mars or a luxurious moon base or some space station far out there where they could sip on their cocktails and watch as the world unravels on account of the mess they created. Geez, Elon Musk actually ties into a lot of these. It really makes you wonder.
Apparently we may just experience the worst solar flare in history in 2024. So let's all pretend the sun's surface is like a pot of boiling water. Well, with boiling water, occasionally a bunch of steam kind of bursts out. Well, that's what we call a solar flare, folks. These solar flares can be pretty serious business. When the sun decides to flare up, it spews a bunch of energy and particles into space. If Earth happens to be in the way, it can mess with our stuff, especially anything electronic. Sometimes these flares are no big deal and we just get a bit of a light show up there, but if a really big one comes our way, it can mess with satellites, power grids, and communication systems. If the impact is bad enough, it could lead to economic issues. Imagine a world without the internet, power, and all the tech we've come to depend on. That could cause some serious problems, not just in our daily lives, but also for businesses and entire economies.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the Megalodon, and bear with me here. In the same passage about how humanity will create sons in our image to usurp us, he also talks about humanity wielding magic to give rise to the beasts of the past to devour us. super bleak, but again, this is the prophet of doom we're talking about here. So how can this one be interpreted with the hindsight of the present, and how the heck does it relate to megalodons, you ask? Well, I'm sure you've all heard by now that scientists are attempting to use genetics to revive an ancient species that our ancestors drove to extinction. Yeah, not the megalodon, but by this year, we will have hit the undo button on the woolly mammoth, which is impressive, but not exactly a world-ending species. However, once we do succeed in reviving the mammoth, the possibilities for bringing back other extinct creatures are endless. Jurassic Park, anyone? I've seen enough of those movies to know that bringing back the dinosaurs is a terrible, terrible idea. But it seems like the march of progress thanks to science, or magic as Nostradamus might have been trying to describe it, would undoubtedly attempt to bring back these demons if they could.
And we're gonna finish off the list with probably the biggest, quite frankly, the most plausible threat of anything on this list, the reptilian threat. So in part 2 we discussed the threat of an alien invasion, but another interpretation on that is that the threat of attack from other beings may not come from above, but from below the surface of the earth in the form of reptilian creatures. You've probably heard of this conspiracy theory before, that reptilian shapeshifters live among us already, taking on the form of celebrities and prominent political figures, seeping their way into our society, controlling us from the shadows. Well, perhaps in 2024, that's the year they make their big move, shedding their humanoid disguises as the rest of their reptilian underlings ascend from the cavernous depths to enact a worldwide invasion. Yeah, those sinkholes we mentioned earlier, that's where the reptilian hordes start like springing up from. That change in power over in Europe, that's the reptilian king rising to rule and enslave the people of the continent. And it all happens during the biggest solar flare in history, so that all of our technology just like conks out as the reptilian beasts descend upon us. It's gonna be quite the year, folks, so strap in. Nostradamus sure did have a lot of dark prophecies to share, and we're back to bring you some more. We're just gonna get right into it, so take it away, AJ.
Alright, so according to this dude who lived half a millennium ago, 2024 is gonna be jam-packed with all kinds of crazy crap going on, and if somehow all of Nostradamus' predictions do come true this year, then not only are you gonna need to build yourself a nuclear bunker, but you also may need to build an ark too. That's right, the biblical flood is coming. It was said to be caused by seemingly endless torrents of rain so powerful that it literally left no mountain above the surface, submerging every single continent and turning the entire planet into one huge ocean. In the book of Genesis, this flood was sent out by God because the big man upstairs was so displeased with how the human race turned out that he decided to essentially annihilate everyone and everything, save for Noah, his family, and 2 of every species of animals. So if you ever dreamed of sailing or living out your best pirate life, then according to Nostradamus, the time has come this year.
AJ's point leads me to another possible scenario. This biblical-sized flood could send us into a water world scenario, and that would really be a nightmare. Out of all the cool movie worlds I'd want to live in, water world, very low on that list. I actually think it's kind of a cool movie, but it's not amazing or anything, and certainly not a world I'd want to live in. For one thing, I'd be seasick the entire time. I like a nice cruise on a boat, but I could not do it 24/7. And in this situation, so much of humanity would have already perished. Now what's left of us would be floating around on makeshift rafts or stranded on top of skyscrapers surrounded by water. And just like in Waterworld, there'd be rowdy bandits on jet skis pillaging and plundering their way across the sea. If you're enjoying the video so far, you can support the channel by pressing like, subscribing, and ringing that notification bell.
Next up, let's talk about how Nostradamus predicted that the sky is falling. Now, I'm not sure if this particular prophecy is meant to be taken literally or is some sort of metaphor or something like that, but in one of Nostradamus' passages, he describes how the moon, yes, the literal moon, will fall out of the sky, out of orbit, and collide with Earth. I have no idea how this could be interpreted, so I'm just gonna take it at face value here. Now, the moon is locked in orbit and wouldn't be able to collide with Earth on its own. It would need a ginormous force, like way bigger than anything we've ever seen, in order to shove the moon out of its orbit, like some kind of celestial event with absurd amounts of power. Now, coincidentally, NASA recently rediscovered a 54 million ton asteroid that will make its way past Earth in October October of this year. Now, NASA has said that there's a 1 in 11.5 million chance of this asteroid colliding with Earth, so the odds of that happening are quite slim. But with that being said, if this asteroid misses the Earth and hits the moon instead, the impact of the moon smashing into Earth would be like the ultimate doomsday scenario, and like a cosmic game of dominoes would actually lead to a lot of his other predictions coming true. Picture an explosion so massive it makes the most enormous volcanic eruption seem like a tiny little. The energy released would shake the planet to its core, causing seismic waves that would make earthquakes look like child's play. And the sky, just forget about it. Be a cloud of debris would shoot up, blocking out the sun and plunging us into darkness. But wait, it gets worse. The aftermath would be a global nightmare. The Earth's crust would crack and heave, triggering mega tsunamis that would drown coastlines. And the sky-high dust would mess up our climate big time, leading to a deep freeze or a scorching heat wave, making it nearly impossible for life to survive on Earth.
All right, I'm going to piggyback off AJ's point once again to discuss the aftermath of this falling sky scenario in greater detail. So one possible scenario, of course, is that the Earth experiences this massive heat wave, with the land left completely scorched. It's hard to believe that anyone would survive all of that, but let's just say there were some stragglers, the last remnants of humanity aimlessly wandering through the wasteland in some sort of Mad Max scenario, lips cracked, mouths dry, barely any water left in their bodies, dreaming of the days where their bottoms were damp with perspiration. Sounds like a real nightmare. But if they did manage to survive, to begin building a new society in the scorched desert sands coating the entire planet, who then would rise? Well, this would be the exact opposite of our water world scenario. Here, liquid would be the planet's greatest commodity. Roaming bands of mutated bandits would scour the sands, crushing anyone with precious water who stood in their path.
Next up, let's talk about the Devourer of Worlds. Now, if you thought these predictions were absolutely insane, you haven't seen nothing yet. In part 2 of this series, James touched on how Nostradamus predicted that beings from other planets, yeah, that's right, aliens, would wage war against Earth. But apparently, these aliens are going to be the least of our problems. You see, later on in that same passage, Nostradamus described a celestial being, not unlike God himself, who will come down upon the Earth and devour all that remains of our wrecked planet, literally consuming the entire freaking world. Now, it seems like these aliens are just the heralds of doom in this scenario. Maybe they were just attempting to warn us about this impending doom, but our simple monkey brains just start attacking, all the while a literal planet eater slowly but surely approaches Earth to consume it. And it won't just be Earth either. Apparently, this being is so massive that it will swallow up all of the planets in the entire solar system, including the sun itself, leaving behind a void of darkness as it carves its way through the Milky Way. Honestly, this sounds like where Stan Lee got his inspiration for the Marvel villain Galactus. Like, Nostradamus might have been onto something, right? Or maybe, just maybe, this is the cosmic force that's said to push the moon into Earth. How crazy would it be if Galactus himself was the first domino to kickstart the end of the world? Probably not, but we're just gonna have to wait and see.
And where will we end up if a Galactus-type entity consumes us? I mean, sure, we might just cease to exist or get crushed in some sort of dark void, but what if this Galactus situation is something more like the black hole we discussed in part 3? What if we end up far out into the middle of space in some nightmarish realm, surrounded on all sides by aggressive alien fleets, immediately demanding to know what we're doing in their solar system? Sure, the world wouldn't have ended, but we'd be in an entirely different kind of nightmare. Aliens start descending upon our planet, shoving their blasters in our faces, grilling us with questions through their advanced universal translators. What creatures are you? You invade our solar system? No. We've been transported here by a large, unknown entity in a purple spacesuit. We've been trying desperately to return home. Basically Star Trek. That's the world I want to live in, not Waterworld.
Next up, let's talk zombies. In the previous part of this series, James mentioned how Nostradamus predicted a plague spread by birds, or as some of you in the comments like to describe them, government spies. Now, a few predictions later, Nostradamus goes on to explain how human beings will go insane with rage and devour one another. If we put 2 and 2 together here, we can surmise that birds will be the one to pass this virus onto humans, which will have some sort of mad cow disease effect on human beings, leading to a literal zombie outbreak. Now, if you've been keeping up with the news recently, there's actually a bird flu going around right now that has been called a highly pathogenic avian influenza, which is wiping out bird populations and even other species of animals across the globe. Now, perhaps it's this virus that mutates into something much worse that causes this terrifying zombie scenario, or it could be something totally different, like the Last of Us type of fungus that drives humans mad. I mean, Nostradamus doesn't usually dive into the details, but in any case, mass human hysteria and eating one another really does not sound like a good time.
Alright, this horrifying idea of humans eating one another could also be interpreted in another way. What if it's not necessarily us literally eating each other, but the technology we've created eating us? Now, we've talked about AI being our downfall in this series, but what about VR specifically? I tried VR for the first time a couple months back, and I gotta say, if I had it in my home, I'd be on there far more than I'd like to admit. It is pretty cool, and you know the technology is only going to improve. A VR game so advanced, so immersive, could draw us in so deeply that the lines between reality and fiction begin to blur, or maybe we just no longer care about the real world because we can throw on a pair of goggles and live in a world where we fly around on Falcor from the Neverending Story, shooting at Klingons with RoboCop's Auto 9 pistol. Like, should I spend my day doing that? Or should I go to my cousin's funeral? I only met her like once, I barely even knew her, I don't think the family would care. You know what, I have a date with Lara Croft at 3, I'd better just stay right where I am. You can see from my incredibly realistic scenario that VR may become so easy to get lost in that our minds literally become consumed by it.
Next, let's talk Planet of the Apes. So Nostradamus' predictions actually extend beyond the tragic and apparently horrifically violent end of humanity. According to the Prophet of Doom, when it's all said and done, humanity will have successors that will dominate what remains of Earth long after we're gone. But it won't be reptilian lizard people. Thank God. Actually, our successors will be a lot closer to us on the evolutionary tree. Apes. Yeah, that's right. It seems like Pierre Boulle took a page out of the Nostradamus Doomsday playbook. If you've seen any of the Planet of the Apes movies or read the book, you'll know that these hyper-intelligent primates can be basically just as cruel as humans. So it seems like even in the event when all of us are wiped out, there will always be monkeys running the earth. You know, on second thought, maybe we should give the reptiles a try.
Right, maybe our successors won't be reptilians or apes at all though. Maybe the future is fish. We mentioned a massive size flood at the very start of this list, followed by a water world scenario. Well, it's very logical to assume then that if this is the direction Earth went, the creatures of the sea would become more abundant and possibly even evolve into a new form of intelligent life. Or perhaps the remnants of humanity would evolve to become more fish-like, like take Kevin Costner in Waterworld. He had gills and he could breathe underwater. He was a fish mutant. It happened in that movie, so it's gotta be true.
Starting off our list are solar flares. Most energy from a solar flare is radiated away as ultraviolet and X-ray light. However, the intense energy of a flare can also heat up nearby gas in the sun's atmosphere, launching enormous blobs of charged particles known as coronal mass ejections, CMEs, out into space. Now, if that happens, radio and radar systems around the world can black out, and electrical grids may become overloaded and lose power, which would cause absolute chaos. Now, some experts fear that a sufficiently large CME could create an internet apocalypse by overloading undersea internet cables and leaving parts of the world without web access for weeks or months, which is such a scary thought. Long-standing blackouts could potentially cost America alone $41.5 billion a day. Not to mention, with the electrical grid down, the economy would be greatly destabilized. Now, satellites and space stations which orbit beyond the protection of Earth's atmosphere could also be debilitated by the renegade radiation of CMEs. Now, space weather experts at NASA and other agencies take this threat seriously and closely monitor the sun for potentially hazardous activity. Hawaii. Next up, we have the Toba supervolcano. Lake Toba supervolcano on the Indonesian island of Sumatra is currently home to the largest volcanic lake on Earth, formed 74,000 years ago when it last blew in the biggest eruption for 25 million years. It is estimated that around 2,800 cubic kilometers of volcanic ash and lava were thrown into the atmosphere, and it may be about to erupt again. As with any super eruption, huge quantities of ash and sulfur dioxide produced can have a devastating effect on the global climate. But a number of factors make the prospect of a Toba super eruption much more intimidating than, say, one at Yellowstone. Toba is located on the densely populated island of Sumatra, home of over 50 million vulnerable people, and is only 40 kilometers from the Indian Ocean, in which catastrophic tsunamis would certainly be generated. Additionally, reports of volcanic gases and heating of the ground's surface have led to suggestions that the volcano may again be waking up. Now, if it happened again, it would blacken the sky, send temperatures plummeting, destroy crops globally, and produce huge tsunamis. It would likely end the lives of millions immediately and many, many more over the course of a few years. Moving on to the Helena slump. A great danger is posed by the possible collapse of the southern portion of Kilauea volcano on the big island of Hawaii. The south slope is geologically unstable. Called the Helena slump, this could drop 12,000 cubic kilometers of rock into the Pacific Ocean, generating a mega tsunami that would go around the Pacific Ocean and reach the western seaboard of North America in a matter of hours, overpowering coastal communities. There is evidence that a similar collapse of the nearby Mauna Loa around 12,000 years ago generated a tsunami with a run-up height of over 400 meters. Now, even as recently as 1975, movement of the Helena slump generated a smaller yet destructive tsunami that reached California. Given that the slump is continually active and moving, it might only take a jolt from an earthquake in the tectonically active state to set in motion this catastrophic chain of events. Now, the scary thing is that we can't do anything to stop it, and this threat will be looming over us. Now let's discuss gamma ray bursts. Gamma rays are the most dangerous forms of radiation. Gamma ray bursts likely result from the merging of two dying stars and can travel through almost anything, so that is not good for us humans. The event generates powerful beams of energy, firing charged particles into space in a spectacular surge of light. Now, if Earth were to be in the path of a gamma ray burst, radiation would destroy our atmosphere and produce nitrogen oxides, a gas that would eradicate the ozone layer. Without the ozone layer, the sun's ultraviolet rays would reach the surface unimpeded, wiping out the plankton in the ocean that produces oxygen to the atmosphere and disrupting the food chain, while causing other serious effects such as skin cancer. Presently, mechanisms for this generation of gamma ray burst emissions are not fully understood, so we just have to hope that one strong enough doesn't wipe us out. Now we have the San Andreas Fault. The San Andreas Fault is a continental right lateral strike slip transform fault that extends roughly 750 miles through the Californias. It forms the tectonic boundary between the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate. Now, a study found that the risk of a large earthquake here may be increasing more rapidly than scientists had previously believed. The risk is currently concentrated on the southern section of the fault, aka the region around Los Angeles, because strong earthquakes have occurred relatively recently on the central 1857 and northern 1906 segments of the fault, while the southern section has not seen any similar rupture for at least 300 years. Now, if or when it ruptures, it would be strongly felt and potentially cause significant damage throughout much of Southern California. All the data suggests that the fault is ready for the next big earthquake, but exactly when the triggering will happen and when the earthquake will occur is unknown, which is one of the scariest parts. Now we have the North Sea tsunami. The North Sea may seem an unlikely place for a devastating tsunami, but climate change has led to concern that a submarine landslide in the region might lead to just this. Scientists have suggested that over 6,000 years ago, a sharp sea level rise attributed to a changing climate and the rapid melting of ice, and it added weight to the submarine glacial deposits at the edge of the Norwegian continental shelf, destabilizing them and causing a 300-kilometer long landslide. This generated a tsunami that reached heights of up to 20 meters in the Shetland Islands, 10 in the Norwegian coast, and 6 meters off the northern and western coast of Scotland. Now, should Earth experience such rapidly warming climate again, and experience the associated melting of the Greenland and/or West Antarctic ice sheets, a similar event might as well be possible, which today would affect the coastal populations of Scotland and Norway and perhaps even London. Onto the Cascaden Big One. At the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, just off the west coast of North America, and running from Northern California to Vancouver Island, is a subduction zone, a place where the Pacific Ocean floor is being forced beneath the North American landmass. Now, the rate of movement of the ocean floor here is currently just 40 millimeters a year, but the upper part of the system is currently stuck, meaning that the North American plate is being compressed. At some point, the pressure being built up has to be released, and this will be in the form of a massive earthquake, perhaps up to a magnitude of 9. This could cause a collapse of the coastal region of up to 2 meters and a possible horizontal displacement of 30 meters. Now, shortly after the intense shaking subsides, the coastal community will be struck by a tsunami that can make the 2011 Japanese wave look small. Around 7 million people live in this region, from Vancouver through Seattle to Tacoma and Portland. Scientists have calculated that in the last 10,000 years, the region has suffered 41 large earthquakes, occurring with an average interval of 244 years, and the last was a magnitude 9, and that was 315 years ago, so this could happen at any time. Next up is that an asteroid hits Earth. On February 15, 2013, a fireball streaked across the sky over Russia and exploded in a window-shattering airburst. Now, it was nearly a disaster, as a ground strike may have ended the lives of tens of thousands of people. Hours after the event, a space rock 3 times larger threaded the space between Earth and its artificial satellites. Now, had this asteroid struck a densely populated location like New York, it would have destroyed Midtown instantly, blasted down surrounding skyscrapers, and rained firestorm-spawning meteors for hours. Now, short-term death tolls might have reached the millions. Now, of course, water covers 71% of Earth, and many large inland regions remain sparsely populated. Thus, in the rare case such a massive rock actually hit Earth, it would stand a small chance of striking a population center. But a nation wrecker or even a planet killer could come knocking someday, perhaps sooner than we'd like to think. Now we have a megathrust earthquake. On April 1st, 2014, a magnitude 8.2 earthquake occurred 97 kilometers off the northwest coast of Chile, causing landslides and a tsunami to hit the coast. This earthquake created the possibility for an even larger earthquake for Chile in the near future due to the location of the earthquake. Now, the earthquake originated from the subduction zone, where one tectonic plate, the Nazca Plate, is plunging underneath another, the South American Plate. This subduction zone lies within the Ring of Fire, an arc in the Pacific containing 75% of the world's active volcanoes, which causes many of the world's seismic activity. When a tectonic plate moves under another, faults can come under severe amounts of stress, and any release of tension causes seismic activity, namely earthquakes. Now, the April 2014 earthquake was a megathrust earthquake, or a major earthquake caused by the release of tension from a subduction zone. Now, it only relieved 33% of the tension on the faults, leaving the rest to be relieved in the near future. And last on our list is black holes. Our galaxy is full of black holes, dozens of miles wide. Their gravity is so strong they swallow everything. Now, based on such observations and even more theoretical arguments, researchers guesstimate there are about 10 million black holes in the Milky Way. Now, if a normal star were moving towards us, we'd know it, but with a black hole, there is little warning. Assuming that black holes are randomly distributed throughout the galaxy and that there really are a few 100 million of them present, this likely means that the closest black hole to Earth is only around 40 to 80 light years away. Now, if a black hole contacts the Earth, of course it will swallow us. But we don't need to be swallowed in order to suffer catastrophic consequences. If a black hole simply passes very close by the Earth, it would cause what's known as a tidal disruption event, an event where the black hole's gravitational influence on the closer side of the Earth is so much stronger than the farther side of the Earth that it actually begins ripping our planet apart. Similarly, the top side of Earth would be pulled down relative to the center, while the bottom side gets pulled upward. What I'm pretty much saying is the gravitational and atomic bonds holding Earth together could be shattered, transforming our planet from a solid sphere into a thin, stretched debris stream that looks like a piece of spaghetti. Now, in fact, astronomers have named this exact process spaghettification because of the stretching effects that black holes have. Earth's natural forces are awe-inspiring yet potentially devastating. Let's delve into the specifics of the top 10 upcoming natural disasters in 2024 that could dramatically impact humanity. As we explore these powerful phenomena, remember the power of preparation and knowledge. Kicking off our list is the awe-inspiring yet daunting Yellowstone supervolcano, a colossal force of nature hidden in plain sight beneath the serene landscapes of Yellowstone National Park. This supervolcano is no ordinary geological feature. It harbors a massive magma chamber stretching over an estimated area of 3,472 square miles. The scale and power of this supervolcano are hard to comprehend. If it were to erupt, the consequences would be cataclysmic. We're talking about the ejection of over 1,000 cubic kilometers of rock and ash into the atmosphere, an event that could radically transform landscapes, devastate ecosystems, and disrupt human life on an unprecedented scale. This eruption has the potential to spew volcanic material with such force that it could blanket large parts of North America, affecting areas thousands of miles away from the epicenter. Not only this, but the enormous volume of ash and particles thrust into the atmosphere could significantly reduce sunlight reaching the Earth's surface, leading to what scientists term a volcanic winter. This scenario would not only lower global temperatures, but could also disrupt agriculture systems and food supplies, leading to far-reaching impacts on human societies and natural environments. While the likelihood of such an eruption in the near future remains low, the mere existence of such a powerful force beneath one of America's most beloved national parks is a humbling reminder of the dynamic and ever-changing nature of our planet. Mother Nature's really out here keeping us on our toes, alright? You never know what to expect. Next on our list is the looming threat of the big one in the Cascadia subduction zone, a 620-mile fault line that runs along the Pacific Northwest. This region, encompassing parts of Washington, Oregon, and Northern California, is bracing for a potentially catastrophic earthquake. Geologists and seismologists, those are earthquake scientists, warn that this zone is not just overdue for a quake, but is capable of unleashing one with a magnitude of up to 9.0. Such a colossal seismic event could trigger devastating tsunamis, capable of inundating coastal areas with walls of water. The impact would extend far beyond the immediate shaking. We're talking about significant structural damage to buildings, bridges, and infrastructure, potentially cutting off essential services and disrupting millions of lives. Additionally, the aftermath could see a cascade of secondary disasters, including landslides and flooding, severely impacting the region's economy and environment. The Pacific Northwest's preparation and response plans are continuously evolving, as the potential for this seismic event poses quite a formidable challenge to the resilience of these communities. Now let's delve into the critical issue of the melting Antarctic ice sheet. As global temperatures continue to rise, largely due to human-induced climate change, the stability of the West Antarctic ice sheet is increasingly at risk. Scientists are particularly concerned about this region because much of the ice sheet rests on bedrock that is below sea level, making it vulnerable to warm ocean currents. If a significant portion of this ice sheet were to collapse, it could trigger a catastrophic rise in global sea levels, potentially by several meters. Such an event would have profound implications for coastal cities across the globe, exposing them to unprecedented flooding and erosion. It's not the last time I'm gonna say unprecedented, I'm just gonna warn ya. This scenario isn't just a distant possibility, it's a pressing concern that underscores the urgent need for effective climate action to mitigate these risks. The impact on human populations, ecosystems, and global weather patterns would be profound, reshaping coastlines and displacing millions of people. About halfway on our list, we have the threat posed by an undetected asteroid, straight out of a sci-fi horror movie. Despite the efforts of space agencies worldwide, which vigilantly monitor thousands of near-Earth near-Earth objects, also called NEOs, the possibility of a surprise asteroid remains a haunting prospect. These celestial bodies, often hurtling through space at incredible speeds, can easily go unnoticed, especially if they're small or come from certain directions that are harder to observe, like from the direction of the sun, alright? It's really hard to look directly at it. The concern is not unfounded. Even a relatively small asteroid, undetected until it's too late, could unleash an energy equivalent to multiple nuclear bombs upon impact. But beyond localized devastation, such an impact could also inject vast amounts of dust and debris into the atmosphere, potentially triggering climactic changes on a global scale. These changes could disrupt weather patterns, affect food production, and have long-lasting environmental impacts. Next up, we delve into the daunting realm of Category 6 hurricanes. In a world where climate change is heating up our oceans, the once theoretical possibility of hurricanes surpassing the current Category 5 scale is becoming increasingly plausible. These supercharged storms, a notch above the highest level on the Saifir-Simpson hurricane wind scale, could pack up winds exceeding 200 miles per hour. As somebody who is in kilometers, that's even more kilometers. That's crazy. The implications are staggering. With such ferocious power, these hurricanes could cause unimaginable damage, dwarfing the destruction caused by their predecessors. Their increased intensity and frequency not only signal a profound shift in our planet's climate dynamics, but also pose a significant challenge to coastal cities, demanding measures in disaster preparedness and response. Next up, we have the haunting specter of an H5N1 avian influenza pandemic that looms as a significant global threat. This strain of bird flu is notorious for its high mortality rate in birds, and it has also caused severe illness and death in humans who have come into close contact with infected birds. The primary concern is the virus's potential mutation that could enable it to transmit easily between humans. Such a mutation could ignite a catastrophic pandemic, possibly more severe than what we will call Schmovid-19. The world has already witnessed the profound societal and economic disruptions caused by the panorama, and H5N1 panorama could present even greater challenges as our current vaccines and treatments might be less effective against this novel and potentially more viral strain. The global health community remains vigilant as the emergence of such a virus would require rapid response and international cooperation to prevent a disaster of unprecedented scale. There we go. In an era marked by drastic climactic shifts, the shadow of mega floods looms large. These are not your typical seasonal floods, they are colossal in scale, capable of submerging vast areas underwater for prolonged periods. Triggered by extreme weather patterns such as unprecedented rainfall or rapid melting of snow and ice, these deluges have the potential to reoccur, reminiscent of historical great floods. The impact of such events is profound and far-reaching. Entire regions could find themselves underwater, leading to catastrophic consequences for millions of people. Infrastructure, homes, and livelihoods could be washed away in an instant, leaving lasting scars on the affected communities. The environmental repercussions are severe, with ecosystems facing irreversible damage, threatening both biodiversity and land productivity. Next up, we have megadroughts. Prolonged megadroughts are a formidable climactic phenomenon characterized by their extensive duration, often spanning several decades and impacting vast geographical areas such as the southwestern United States. These relentless droughts would lead to acute water shortages, affecting both urban and rural communities. Water scarcity would not only disrupt daily life, but also impact agriculture productivity, leading to crop failures and a significant strain on food supplies. The economic repercussions would be profound, affecting industries reliant on water and agriculture, and potentially leading to increased prices and shortages of foods and goods. Additionally, the environmental consequences would be severe, including the loss of biodiversity, increased wildfire risks, and the transformation of landscapes. And finally, let's discuss a global heat wave emergency. Okay, picture this. Major cities around the world grappling with consecutive days where temperatures would soar above 50 degrees Celsius. That's 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Such extreme heat would not only create a dire health crisis, with risks of heat stroke and dehydration skyrocketing, but also place an immense strain on power grids as millions turn on air conditioning for relief. The demand could lead to widespread blackouts, further exacerbating the crisis. The impact on wildlife and ecosystems would also be catastrophic. Urban wildlife, unaccustomed to such temperatures, would face severe challenges, and the heat could disrupt delicate ecological balances, leading to unforeseen consequences. In essence, a global heat wave of this magnitude would be an unprecedented event, testing the resilience of our cities, health systems, and the natural world.
Cults. They're creepy, captivating, and downright scary. And some have even predicted the end of the world. Ready to find out which? Up first, one of the world's most famous prophets by the name of Nostradamus, who was born on December 4th all the way back in 1503. This ominous ancestor has had many eerie predictions come true, including the Great Fire of London, the French Revolution, Buddy with the Middle Mustache, both world wars, and even the nuclear destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But there is another prediction made by the prophet that we are really hoping won't come true: the beginning of the end in 2024. I'm talking weather disruptions, major storms, searing heat waves, and massive earthquakes, all taking place at an unprecedented rate in a way we've just never seen. While hearing this might make you want to stock up on canned goods and survival gear, I'm really hoping he's got this one wrong. Either that, or he's actually already gotten it right. You see, the prediction was made in the 1500s, and since then, natural disasters have already greatly increased. So it's very possible Nostradamus' predictions have already come true. And all of this excess fire and brimstone he speaks of for 2024 is something we've already become adaptive to live through. Not calling that a good thing, but maybe the lesser of two evils at this point. For some, however, and more specifically the cult following of people who take the words of Nostradamus for that as gospel, these prophecies are not just a warning, but a direct message that the world is coming to an end. Next up on the list, we have Heaven's Gate. Now, if you're a Little Uzi fan, you might have heard of this one before, as the cult is heavily referenced in the artwork of his second album, Eternal Atake. The cult was founded in 1997 after a near-death experience by Marshall Applewhite and alongside former nurse Bonnie Nettles, who believed that the Earth would be wiped clean by aliens that very same year. The cult followed the idea that the sole purpose of the human body was simply to serve as a container, and that its form existed only to be abandoned upon ascension into the higher realm. The higher realm in this case being referred to as the Kingdom of Heaven, located on the Hale-Bopp comet. In order to reach this ascension, however, Applewhite's followers had to adhere to a strict set of rules, including abandoning their families and leaving behind any worldly possessions along with life as they once knew it, in exchange for a simple life dedicated to the next step on a big home in Rancho Santa Fe. Along with this, his followers were urged to follow sexual abstinence, and in a pledge of loyalty, many members voluntarily underwent the old snip snip. On the day the Hale-Bopp comet came into its closest proximity with Earth, Applewhite, along with 38 of his followers, drank a lethal mixture of phenobarbital and vodka, in the belief that it would free them from their captive human form and grant them a one-way ticket to the Comet Kingdom. Next up, we have Raelism. Not to be confused with realism, this flying saucer cult operated under the belief that human existence, along with the existence of all other living things on Earth, came to be as a direct result of genetic experimentation using the DNA of extraterrestrial life forms. The founder, Claude Vorilhon, who now goes by the name of Rael, created the organization after he was allegedly abducted by aliens and had revealed to him the many secrets of life's creation along with its purpose. Not as foreboding as the rest, as this cult does not necessarily believe the world will end, but rather that it will be taken over by our alien creators themselves in an attempt to end the world as we know it, and replace all current lifestyles with a sensual and hedonistic one that by no means follows the norms of accepted behavior within our current society. The cult, whose headquarters are located located in India, boasts an impressive 85,000 members. But that's not all. The cult also claims to have successfully cloned a baby, which, with all the advances in science to date, is not necessarily unbelievable, but if it's true, impressive nonetheless. Next on the list, we have Falun Gong, a cult which appeared in China in the early 1990s and has actually since been outlawed by the Chinese government. The cult found its basis in the idea that one day the world would end in tragedy, and that in order to achieve fulfillment, you had to follow a strict set of guidelines that ended in the sacrifice of one's own life. Enticing people into the organization through the use of widespread superstitious fallacies and the promise of a better life for its members, the cult spared no expense or life in its quest to convince the public of its legitimacy, with going so far as to stage numerous extreme tragedies that completely violated not only Chinese law, but the Global Human Rights Act. The Falun Gong way also dictates that no man, woman, or child should receive scientific or medical assistance in the case of illness, and as a result, over 1,500 Falun Gong followers have died simply from refusing to receive medical attention. With this, alongside stage tragedies and the unaliving on both a personal and social level, who knows how many followers and innocent bystanders have fallen victim to the vicious cult to date. With the cult never specifying when the world will end, we can't help but wonder if 2024 will be the year. The Falun Gong organization was officially deemed illegal on July 22nd of 1999, and all practices were therefore banned in accordance with Chinese law. The next one goes to a registered enemy of public safety, a cult which in recent years has garnered notoriety due to a documentary released in 2023, which tracks the horrors and the ins and outs of this messed up minefield of coercion and corruption. The Shinrikyo cult, referred to simply as Aum, which translates to Supreme Truth, was founded by Shoko Ashara in Japan. The cult, which heavily relied on scare tactics and manipulation, was goal-driven, the goal being that the leader, Shoko, would successfully take over the island of Japan and would later move on to conquering the world as a whole. The false prophet predicted that Armageddon would occur in the year 1997 and humanity would end, except for the elite few who joined and were worthy of acceptance into the Aum cult. In 1995, leading up to the falsely foreshadowed end of the world, Ashara was convicted of masterminding a sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway that resulted in the injury of 5,500 people and the tragic loss of 13 more. Ashara was sentenced to death for his crimes and is currently awaiting execution. While a large number of the cult's members are currently serving life behind bars, the organization is still considered a threat and has therefore earned its place on a very specific global watch list. The movement for the restoration of the 10 Commandments of God is next on the list. That's a mouthful. They refer to themselves as a fringe sect of Catholicism, but their sinister practices widely separate them from any of their self-claimed sectional counterparts. The cult was formed in the late 1980s by a Ugandan politician by the name of Joseph Kibwetere, after a former SEX worker had come to him claiming to have been seeing visions of the Virgin Mary. When Kibwetere brought these claims to the Vatican, he was dismissed, and so the movement was born. The so-called faith believed that the visions of Mary had been a warning of Armageddon, and claimed that the only hope for salvation was strictly following the 10 Commandments. At its peak, the organization was comprised of 4,000 members, but when the original doomsday date came and went, that number dwindled significantly. In a panic, Kibwetere quickly amended his original claim of January 1st, 2000 for the world's last day to March 17th of the same year. When March 17th rolled around, 530 members of the church gathered to rejoice in prayer at the chapel, but were met with something entirely different when an explosion went off in the village, engulfing the church in massive flames, and it was only then the patrons realized that all of the windows and doors had been boarded shut. Many mass graves were later uncovered within the village, containing hundreds more people who had once resided in the area. While some believe Kibwetere to have perished in the fire, reports of sighting after the fact beg the question of whether or not he is still going around prepping for the true end of days. Up next is James Weasley Rawls and the Survivalists, an individualized cult movement that preaches preparation and warns of the inevitable coming of the end. Rawls, the American author, former Army intelligence officer, and survival retreat consultant, has garnered himself quite the cult following after the release of his novel How to Survive the End of the World as We Know It in 2022. Rawls has since released 8 additional novels following along the survivalist subject line. The self-declared prepper believes the world will come to an end due to power grid failure, which honestly is a really scary take. No aliens, no cataclysmic weather events, simply just the removal of access to power, being enough to topple societies, countries, and continents as a whole within days, months, and years, coming to the inevitable dismantlement of human rule. Let's face it, how many of us could realistically survive without technology for more than a few days, let alone months? I'm talking about heat, running water, refrigeration, GPS, so much more than just communication and entertainment. The economy would fall and chaos would ensue. Rawls, who is believed to reside in a secret bunker located somewhere in San Jose, California, says that any prepper worth his salt is already set up with self-sufficient, off-the-grid accommodations including firewood or coal, years worth of food stores, gardens, livestock, and weaponry, and if they're smart, an advanced medical training certificate too. Next up, we have a religion-based doomsday cult making international headlines. This comes after leader Paul Mackenzie and 30 of his followers were brought to court in the coastal town of Malindi in Kenya on charges of being directly responsible for the deaths of 429 members of their church. Good News International Church. Out of the 429, an estimated 200 were some of the most vulnerable members of society, if you can infer what I mean by that. The bodies were found in dozens of shallow graves across 800 acres of ranch belonging to the church located along the coast. The graves were found after 15 rescued and former members of the church alerted authorities on what exactly had been going on. 4 of the 15 later died in hospital due to malnutrition and starvation. Autopsies done on the mass graves showed that many of the deaths had been due to starvation, forced restriction of the airways, and suffocation. Mackenzie had garnered his following by convincing religious members of his sham establishment that the world was coming to an end, and in order to achieve salvation, they must confine themselves to the parameters of his village, cease interactions with others, including other members of the church, and destroy any vital documents, including any identification, certificates of titles to property, certificates of academics, or marriage. Recent reports have stated that the charges placed against Mackenzie recognize his actions as those of unforgivable terror. Up next, we have the Order of the Solar Temple, founded in Geneva in 1984. This religious cult was created as a revival for the Knights Templar, a religious military order founded in the 12th century and later dismantled in 1312. In 1985, Bernard Raymond Faber Palaprat, claiming to be the former head of the Knights of Templar, attempted to recreate the organization but was unsuccessful, as his group split into so many separate fractions following separate belief systems. Luc Joret, a proud member of one of the fractions, later went on to develop his very own religious organization by the name of the Order of the Solar Temple, with a belief system strongly rooted in the idea of the world's imminent destruction. More specifically, Joret believed a worldwide catastrophe would take place in the mid-1990s. In preparation for the event, members were invited to participate in a ceremony deemed necessary for ascension to a higher spiritual plane. The ceremony, which consisted of the voluntary and involuntary deaths of 53 members of the Solar Temple across Canada and Switzerland, ended in flames as the buildings in which the ceremonies took place in were set on fire upon completion of the ritual by members who remained in the building after the fires were started. A year later, 16 more followers met the same fate, along with 5 more 2 years after that. Dark stuff. And finally, we have yet another space cult existing under the guise of religious extraterrestrial worship. UFO religion, as it's often been referred to, originated in Taiwan in 1993 after being founded by Chen Hongmin, a former professor of sociology at the Qianan College of Pharmacology and Science. The religion, which has been described as an offbeat mix of Buddhism, Christianity, New Age religion, and select Western cult believes in extraterrestrial input with regards to human affairs, bases itself in spiritual energy and the recognition of evil. Founder Hong Min was convinced that the end of days would come in March of 1998 and moved his many followers across the world to Garland, Texas. Why? Well, he thought Garland sounded like God's land. He then prophesied that God would appear to his disciples in the form of Hong Min on TV, specifically Channel 18, to formally announce his second coming. And when that day came, followers would be granted access to the spaceships in the sky that had lingered just above them for years, disguised as clouds. However, when the day came, nothing happened, and so Hongmin revised his prophecy, claiming that he had simply gotten the date wrong. He relocated his cult to New York. However, many of his disciples, disenchanted, opted to return home to Taiwan or apply for legal immigrant status in the United States and start new lives. If he did get the date wrong, though, who's to say that a peer review of his calculations wouldn't schedule the end of days for 2024?
Guys, the psychic Baba Vanga has come out with some terrifying predictions for 2024, so let's take a look at what she had to say. First, we have the orbit alternation. It is said that for 2024, Baba predicted the alteration in the very orbit of Earth. The orbits of bodies in the solar system are determined by gravitational forces and are always prone to change. However, such alterations typically take place in a very gradual way over long time periods, so anything more radical would have dramatic outcomes for us all. Now, this could cause us humans to have a lot of problems. If this happens over a short period of time, it could spark issues including climate disruption and a spike in radiation levels. Now, NASA is real serious about protecting our planet and doesn't want this to happen. In 2022, NASA successfully altered an asteroid's orbit that was heading towards Earth. All of us have a responsibility to protect our home planet. After all, it's the only one we have, said NASA Administrator Bill Nelson. This mission shows that NASA is trying to be ready for whatever the universe throws at us. NASA has proven that we are serious as a defender of the planet. This is a watershed moment for planetary defense of all humanity, demonstrating commitment from NASA's exceptional team and partners from around the world. So if the orbit alteration happens quickly and does cause chaos, NASA will do everything they can to help us, even though they might not be able to prevent it. Next up, we have climate change. Baba has made predictions about environmental issues such as climate change, and let me tell you, climate change is already here and affecting us poorly. Sea levels along the US coastline are projected to rise on average 10 to 12 inches in the next 30 years per NOAA. For context, that will be as much as the rise in sea level measured over the last 100 years. That is not good news for the 127 million Americans in coastal counties. Now, due to climate change, flooding is expected to become more frequent and severe. By 2050, scientists expect flooding to occur approximately 10 times more than it does today. Climate change is also altering ecosystem productivity, exacerbating the speed of invasive species, and changing how species interact with each other and with their environment. These changes are reconfiguring ecosystems in unprecedented ways, and if we don't start to try and fix all this soon, we are just screwed. Now we have nuclear attacks. Baba anticipates a major country is conducting nuclear weapon tests or attacks this year. Now, who, where, and when has not been predicted, but there are a lot of viable options. The United States has approximately 4,000 nuclear warheads in its arsenal. Russia is testing bombs, and also newly designed nuclear weapons can create radioactive tsunamis that render targeted areas unlivable for decades. Rogue nations such as Iran and North Korea are desperately trying to obtain nuclear weapons, and according to CNBC, China is rapidly expanding its nuclear arsenal and could have 1,000 nuclear warheads by 2030, part of Beijing's ambitious military buildup. Now in 2021, humanity has about 13,410 nuclear weapons, which is too high for me, but now that it's 2024, I'm sure there's thousands more, and I just don't like that. Moving on to droughts. Okay, so she did not predict this for this year. This is something she's already predicted that's come true. Yep, you've heard that right. Some of her predictions have come true. Baba apparently predicted a number of extreme weather events in 2022. She prophesied that a number of large cities around the world would be hit by large-scale droughts and water shortages. Now that year, the UK had its driest July since 1935, officially declaring drought on August 12th. Meanwhile, other countries in Europe also faced drought, including France, Italy, and Portugal. Extreme droughts measured by surface soil moisture covered almost 50% of global land areas in 2022, marking the second most widespread year since 1980. In many places, these droughts were also accompanied by unprecedented heat waves. It was so shocking that a study titled Understanding and Attribution of Extreme Heat and Drought Events in 2022, Current Situation and Future Challenges, examined the events from a global perspective perspective, shedding light on the causes and implications of these extreme weather phenomena. Now, hopefully this was just a one-time thing, but with climate change, anything can happen. Now let's talk about the floods. Again, these floods already happened, but it's still scary that she predicted these. She claimed that Australia and Asia would experience floods, and it was reported in 2022 that heavy rain across southeast Australia this month has forced thousands of people from their homes. Flooding has affected at least 16 rivers in the states of New South Wales and Victoria, as well as the island state of Tasmania. The flooding has resulted from heavy rain over areas with full catchments and soils still saturated by 2 years of wet La Nina summers. For the first time in decades, some dams are at capacity. Sydney has experienced its wettest year on record, while in other regions, century-old October rainfall records have been broken. In a single hour on October 7th, Melbourne received half its average monthly rainfall. Now that is just crazy. Then heavy monsoon rains and flash flooding ravaged several Southeast Asian countries, ending the lives of dozens of people, forcing thousands to flee their homes, and it damaged key agricultural areas. In October that year, it was said that intense rain was expected to continue throughout Thailand, where 59 of the country's 77 provinces had already been hit by floods, affecting about 450,000 homes and more than 100 hectares. So it seems like she was right again. Now we have solar storms. Baba Vanga is also believed to have predicted a powerful solar storm that would affect Earth's climate. In 2023, she predicted a terrible solar storm. Now, while solar activity is a lot more regular than you may think, there were multiple notable solar flares that occurred. X-class flares are big major events that can trigger planet-wide radio blackouts and long-lasting radiation storms. If you didn't know, there had been 12 X-class flares in 2023. Now my question is, why didn't anyone tell us about this? It's absolutely terrifying, and the fact that it happened 12 times is insane to me. Space weather experts at NASA and other agencies take this threat seriously, and they closely monitor the sun for potentially hazardous activity, but if a big enough storm or sun flare were to happen, it would put the world in absolute chaos, and that is not something I want to experience in my lifetime. Then there's earthquakes. Some interpretations suggest Baba has predicted significant natural disasters, including earthquakes. While we have gotten better at predicting earthquakes, that doesn't mean we know when all of them will happen or how big they will be. Now, when I hear about the possibility of a major earthquake, I always think of the San Andreas Fault. And if you're a dedicated viewer, you might know that I talk about this fault quite a lot when it comes to natural disaster videos because it's so scary. Now, the risk is currently concentrated on the southern section of the fault, aka the region around Los Angeles, because strong earthquakes have occurred relatively recently on the central 1857 and the northern 1906 segments of the fault, while the southern section has not seen any similar rupture for at least 300 years. That means it's due to rupture any day now. All the data suggests that the fault is ready for the next big earthquake, but exactly when the triggering will happen and when the earthquake will occur is unknown, which I don't like hearing about because it freaks me out. I mean, I live on the East Coast too, so I don't know why it scares me so much, but it really does. Now on to the ice caps melting. Baba said that from 2033 to 2045, the polar ice caps will melt, causing ocean levels to rise. But bad news, that is already happening to us. If emissions continue to rise unchecked, the Arctic could be ice-free in the summer by 2040. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that freaks me out. If this happens, bad things can start to happen. Less ice means less reflected heat, meaning more intense heat waves worldwide. But it also means more extreme winters. Then there's the issue of food. Polar vortexes, increased heat waves, and unpredictability of weather caused by ice loss are already causing significant damages to crops on which global food systems depend. This instability will continue to mean higher prices for food, and guys, I'm already struggling to buy groceries as it is. Now, this could also affect wildlife. If there's less sea ice, animals that depend on it for survival must adapt or die. Loss of ice and melting permafrost isn't good for polar bears, walruses, arctic foxes, snowy owls, reindeer, and many other species. As they are affected, so are the other species that depend on them, in addition to people. Up next is attacks. Bubba has claimed that there will be many attacks on the world in 2024. First of all, she claims there will be an assassination attempt on Vladimir Putin. He's not very well liked, so he has a lot of security, but it appears that he'll need to watch his back even more this year. As it said, he'll face an assassination attempt, not by an international agent, but someone from his own country. Still, Bubba only predicted an attempt on Putin's life, so he'll probably survive. Then she said there'll be an attack on Europe, and Europe is supposedly set for an attack by extremists. Now, she didn't say where exactly in Europe these strikes would take place, so I'd just be overly cautious there. And lastly, we have volcanoes erupting. Bubba has also predicted volcanic eruptions affecting various parts of the world. The Lake Toba supervolcano on the Indonesian island of Sumatra is currently home to the largest volcanic lake on Earth, formed 74,000 years ago when it last blew in the biggest eruption for 25 million years. It is estimated that around 2,800 cubic kilometers of volcanic ash and lava were thrown into the atmosphere, and now it may be about to erupt again. Now, this isn't the only supervolcano. Oh no. Now, the question about supervolcanoes, as it turns out, isn't whether one could destroy all life on Earth, it is when it will do it again. Now, around 200 million years ago, a supervolcano erupted with such insistent energy that 75% of the species on the planet were eradicated. It was so gigantic that it pulled apart North America and Africa and created the Atlantic Ocean in between. So could we have a supervolcano erupt this year? I hope not, because then we'd just all be doomed.
Starting off our list today, we have The Simpsons predicting that AI will take over the world, displacing workers and replacing food. In one episode of The Simpsons, Homer is working at his nuclear power plant. Well, I don't know if you can call what he does work, but he was there. Anyways, Smithers calls the plant workers into his presentation room, I guess, and presents them with an army of AI robots and says, "You will train them and they will replace you." That's pretty unsettling coming from a show that's been known to actively predict the future, but even more unsettling when the episode's claim has actually been backed by tangible data. In a report released by BusinessInsider.com in 2023, the World Economic Forum calculated that 85 million jobs will be replaced by robots by the year 2025, meaning that here in 2024, we're pretty much already halfway there. I feel like robot labor could be a good thing if it didn't mean causing a crap ton of people to lose their jobs and their only source of income.
Alright, season 28, episode 2 of The Simpsons, entitled Friends and Family, has a scene where Marge and Homer are using VR. More specifically, they're eating VR food. They have VR goggles on and start eating virtual reality fudge through straws. It's, of course, pretty silly. But there is actually a company called Flavor 5 Studio dipping into this type of technology. They created this project called Aero Banquets RMX. Now, this is pretty hard for me to explain because with how crazy technology is getting these days, I really feel so out of touch. I feel like a 45-year-old man in the 90s trying to decipher what Pokemon was, or Pokemon, as every parent called it. So from what I can tell, this is almost like a virtual reality art project. It's described on their site as exploring the intersection of food and mixed reality. Basically, you put on VR headsets and dine in VR. Project's goal is to reframe human perceptions and change the way we experience food. I still can tell if you're actually eating something and you're just in a VR world, or if you're tasting fake stuff. I don't know what the world is anymore.
When this technology comes out, if you guys want to fund a trip for James and I, we'll be happy to review it for you. Next up, we have Trump 2024. In an episode released in 2015, long before Trump's original presidential campaign, way back when his catchphrase wasn't MAGA, but simply just "you're fired," The Simpsons released an episode, specifically episode 17 of season 11. And in this episode, Homer Simpson is seen flying past a sign that clearly reads Trump 2024. To take things a step further, The Simpsons also predicted the 2023 incident in which former US President Donald Trump was arrested during his presidency on the same day day that the new Barbie was released. In episode 14 of season 5, Lisa vs. Malibu Stacy, a news report is shown on TV documenting the release of the new Barbie doll. In our case, however, it was the new Barbie movie. At the end of the news report, the news anchor quickly slips in the fact that the US president had been arrested, and the segment ends. Trump was arrested the day that Barbie hit theaters. I know this one happened in 2023, but it just goes to show how scarily accurate The Simpsons have been in the past, making this list all the more terrifying.
Next up, we have 2023's Treehouse of Horror segment, Wild Barts Can't Be Token. At the start of the episode, Mayor Quimby announces that the art museum is closing and that all art will now be sold as NFTs. Now, NFTs were a thing well before this episode was out, but AI art has really become more of a thing and more of a concern really this year. The idea that art museums could start closing up, being replaced by people just throwing on VR headsets and looking at quote-unquote art in a virtual reality setting is really not that far-fetched. I mean, thank God Dune Part 2 came out, because it was really looking like movie theaters were gonna be done for by the end of this year. Anyway, this whole thing is just really creepy, and with how accurate The Simpsons are about things, I could see this one happening very soon.
Next up, we've got economic collapse, which is ironically predicted in the same episode that showcases Trump's 2024 presidential campaign, season 11, episode 17. In the episode, we see the United States economy taking a nosedive right into the ground. Is it BS, or did a group of economic analysts studying the trajectory of economic fall predict either a collapse or major restructuring of the American economy? Here's a hint. It's the second one. But I don't really think this prediction is exclusive to America. We are seeing major economic downfall in many countries, which isn't really surprising considering what we all went through in 2020 and the years that followed. You know, when restaurants shut down and remote working became the norm. And with the state of the world right now, we are looking at a pretty bearish economy. I don't actually know if that word applies here, but basically we're looking at a downwards trajectory.
Next up on the list, we have hover cars. Now, hover cars are of course not unique to The Simpsons. Hover cars are something we've seen in science fiction since the dawn of science fiction, basically. So it's not like The Simpsons came up with something mind-blowing here, but what is pretty mind-blowing is that there is a company called Samson Sky that's saying they're gonna bring out a flying car in 2024. They've already made it, actually. It's just not readily available yet. They call it Switchblade, the world's first flying sports car. Now, from what I can gather from the promo video of this thing, it's really more of just a car with retractable wings that doubles as a car-sized plane. The type of hovering vehicle you're probably thinking of is not really what this thing is, but it's still pretty cool. I mean, retractable wings, it's very like Batman-ish. I don't know what the regulations will be for something like this though. I mean, like, are you gonna need a pilot's license to fly it? How can traffic be controlled in the air with all these like flying cars zipping around? There's a lot to consider. We're not gonna be seeing tons of people using flying cars this year, I don't think, but it's cool that there is one that exists.
Next up, we've got the mission to Mars. In season 27, episode 6, Lisa Simpson, along with the rest of the family, volunteers for a colonization mission to Mars. While the mission is originally set for a date in the future, it gets bumped up due to fear of loss of funding. When it comes time for the space shuttle to launch, Marge and Lisa are strapped in, but ultimately the mission is a failure and the shuttle never actually leaves the ground. If you can't see the connection between this episode's events and current advancements in space travel and technology, you might want to brush up on your current events. Elon Musk has been talking about the colonization of Mars for ages. He even built an entire company, SpaceX, around the goal of colonizing the red planet. In fact, in 2023, the SpaceX Starship was launched. The event ultimately ended in flames because the thing exploded just 4 minutes after takeoff. Luckily, the ship was unmanned. But based off of The Simpsons, it is possible that this year we will see a manned mission launched into space. I mean, it is only natural with the trajectory of the company. And the goal is experimenting with humans' ability to reach Mars. I just hope this launch goes better than the last one. Oh, and by the way, at the end of the episode, a quick clip shows the successful colonization of Mars, which is set to take place in 2051. So stay tuned for that video.
Next on the list, we have the baby translator. So in the season 3, episode 24, Brother, Can You Spare 2 Dimes, Homer's brother Herb invents implants a device that allows a parent to figure out what their infant's cries mean. They're not really saying much, are they? I need some food. You're not getting a whole lot of info out of these things, I'd imagine. What a godsend, though, a piece of tech like this would be, just to immediately know and then, deal with the issue. Well, turns out there is something like it already in the works, and we're not even halfway through the year yet, so who knows, we may start seeing it get used later in 2024. The company behind the tech is called Zoundream, and they're making some pretty interesting strides in infant care tech. On their site, they describe their cry analysis tech. Here's what it says on the site. Using a comprehensive multimodal approach, we've investigated infant cries, analyzing various aspects such as acoustics, electroencephalography, EEG signals, regional cerebral oxygen saturation, NIRS, facial expressions, and other specific parameters. All these studies have helped us to develop our advanced cry analysis technology. There you go, that explains it. You don't even need to buy one of these things. I can just analyze my own acoustics and electroencephalogs and cerebral cortexes and specific parameters. I'll be able to translate babies.
Next up, we've got the government trying to control us, surprise, surprise, through a series of subconscious processes, including music-induced mind control. In season 12, episode 14, New Kids on the Block, I don't know why it's called that, a music producer takes Bart, Nelson, Milhouse, and Ralph to form a boy band, Party Posse. Their first song was a top hit, but it was also subliminal mind control. The chorus, Ivan et Nioj, was actually join the Navy spelt backwards, and soon the population of Springfield was scrambling to secure a spot serving their country. When Bart's sister Lisa confronted the music producer, he admitted that he was in fact a Navy lieutenant, and that subliminal messaging in music had been a long-standing strategy in recruiting young men into the military. With the way the world stands today, we might very well see an uproar in military propaganda in the coming months. Whether or not that takes the form of subliminal messages in hit pop songs remains to be seen, but if any of these other Simpsons predictions are a staple, a reminder, I can't think of the word, it's likely.
Alright, in season 21's Treehouse of Horror episode, there's a segment called Don't Have a Cow, Mankind. So here Krusty the Clown introduces a new type of Krusty burger with meat made from cows who have eaten other cows. That's just hilarious and oddly believable. I could see a fast food company, like a really dirty fast food company, just being like, it's mega meat. All these cows eat other cows, brother. Anyway, this new burger causes like a mad cow type disease in the town of Springfield, turning people into zombies, or munchers as they're called in this episode. Now again, it's not like The Simpsons invented a zombie apocalypse by any stretch, but with how many things that have played out in real life with an eerie similarity to events in The Simpsons, I'm just gonna stay away if any new fast food burger comes out this year with some new weirdo meat, especially if it's meat coming from a cow that grazed on beef. That is funny in a cartoon, vomitrocious in real life. Alright, we're starting things off with robot workers. So in the season 6 episode Itchy and Scratchy Land, the Simpsons visit this kind of futuristic theme park featuring, of course, the beloved and violent Itchy and Scratchy. In this theme park though, instead of having actors in costumes like you'd see at Disneyland, the cartoon cat and mouse are brought to life with robots. Now, robots replacing jobs is not an idea unique to The Simpsons or anything. This is a very well explored genre of science fiction. It's not even a novel idea that robotic characters would be used in a theme park. I mean, we've had versions of this for years with places like Chuck E. Cheese, but those are animatronics far less advanced than what we see in this episode. Point is, with robotics becoming more and more advanced each year, and with the whole very real idea of AI becoming more prominent and taking people's jobs, I think it's a stretch to see more advanced robots being made in the form of some of our favorite cartoon characters and then being used at theme parks. I don't think that's very much of a stretch. We might even have an entire family of Simpsons robots in the very near future. How ironic would that be?
Okay, next up we have the prediction of an all-consuming black hole forming in the year 2024. Fun stuff. In episode 16 of season 21, the citizens of Springfield gather to view the activation of the town's particle accelerator. But when the machine was turned on, two particles collided and created a small black hole. Lisa was the first to discover the anomaly when the black hole began sucking up her tears, and she quickly learned that the more the black hole consumed, the bigger and bigger it got. Well, Homer turned the black hole into a dumping ground, and eventually it got so big that it began to suck up everything everything in its path. The episode ended with the black hole sucking up the entirety of Springfield and eventually the world as a whole. It was obviously a Treehouse of Horror episode. Seems pretty far out, right? Well, maybe not. You see, in January of 2024, India launched a new X-ray satellite into space to observe the threat of black holes on our solar system. If The Simpsons got this one right, I'm thinking the satellite mission is probably a little more than just research.
Next on the list, we have 3D printed food. So in the episode Future Drama, Marge takes a picture of Bart and Lisa before prom and turns it into a 3D printed cake. Now, not only is 3D printing technology becoming more commonplace these days, but yes, 3D printed food is actually a thing. Food Inc. is a company specializing in this technology. They even came out with a restaurant where all the food is 3D printed. They described their company on their site as a one-of-a-kind gourmet experience in which all the food, all the utensils, and all the furniture are completely produced through 3D printing in an immersive futuristic space. We are a conceptual pop-up dinner series where fine cuisine meets art, philosophy, and tomorrow's technologies. So technically this is one that's already happened, but the question is, could 3D printed food become a thing in people's homes soon? Almost definitely. It's really just a matter of when. Also, I wouldn't be able to talk about the concept of 3D printed food without bringing up Star Trek. Yes, food replicators were a thing long before this episode came out, but in The Simpsons it's more specific to 3D printing technology, whereas in Star Trek, the food replicator works by converting energy into matter. It's a very different thing.
Next up, we have The Simpsons' prediction of World War III. The prediction was made in 1987 when the show was still fairly new. It was the 16th short of the series and it was titled simply World War III. Nail on the head. The episode begins with Homer frantically waking up his family and telling him that the Third World War has begun and that the first round of explosives have already been dropped. The family makes their way to an underground shelter only for Homer to tell them that he was in fact joking. Haha. In present-day reality, Homer's ramblings are not so much a joke, but rather a pretty scary warning of what might be to come. Considering the fact that there are currently 5 major wars taking place around the world, I'm thinking the prediction made by The Simpsons back in 1987 is looking far more like it was meant for the year 2024.
Alright, let's talk about that big dome over Springfield in The Simpsons movie. So in the movie, the Environmental Protection Agency places a glass dome over Springfield, protecting the outside world from the town's horrible pollution problem. Now, I don't have any news or rumors about a big giant dome cutting anyone off from the outside world anytime soon, but after the events of 2020 to 2022, could there be some sort of dome technology in place? Something that would help conceal a virus, a disease, or an environmental disaster from leaking out and spreading to surrounding areas? Yeah, hey, it's possible. The year is still young, folks. It's been a pretty chill year so far compared to recent years, but you never know when things might kick off in the worst way.
Next up, AI goes rogue. So in our last video and at the beginning of this video, I touched upon and James touched upon AI robots taking our jobs, which was predicted in episode 17 of season 23. But for this video, I want to talk about what happens when AI systems go rogue. In episode 8 of season 31, Thanksgiving of Horror, Homer buys Marge an AI assistant to help her with the preparation of a Thanksgiving dinner. The AI has been programmed with all of Marge's thoughts, feelings, memories, opinions, and personality traits, and it controls multiple robotic arms situated around the entire home. At first, it's quite handy, but soon the device falls in love with Homer, and the thing goes rogue, trying to replace the real Marge. The AI goes against the guidelines of its programming and is able to successfully connect to the internet, allowing it to access sensitive data and reveal secrets about the real Marge. So we are looking at a device that was able to fall in love with one person, harbor resentment for another, connect to the internet, and cause a whole bunch of chaos. I mean, can anyone say ChatGPT or Sydney maybe? AI devices that can and have connected to the internet and have experienced glitches causing them to claim that they either have fallen in love with humans humans or that they wish to harm them. So yeah, I feel like this prediction's kind of already come true, but I'm also super scared to see how that's gonna progress.
Alright, hologram technology. Once again, not a concept unique to The Simpsons, but something they've shown in one of their many future episodes, and seeing as so many things seem to play out in real life from stuff we've seen in The Simpsons, future tense stories, I think it makes it worth bringing up. Now, holograms are already a thing, but it's not like it's a common household technology yet. We've seen a couple instances of holographic tech in The Simpsons. In one episode, future Bart receives a holographic message inviting him and his band to a gig, and we could start seeing technology like this being used more often in the very near future. Take DreamHawk HD3 holograms, for example, who have a product that's been available for a while. It's a display case which projects 3D holograms from your phone. Pretty cool.
Thank you, Holographic James. I'm just kidding. Or am I? Next up, we have Ivanka for president. This one seems pretty far out there, but I mean, with the amount of times The Simpsons have gotten it right in the past, I truly have come to believe that anything can happen. In episode 17 of season 11, Bart to the Future, we see Lisa as the first female president of the United States, which is great. In the same episode, they also predicted Trump's run for re-election in 2024. In episode 28 of season 4, however, The Simpsons predict that 2024 might be the last election before Ivanka takes the ballot in 2028. In the Treehouse of Horror episode, the family is headed out to buy a Christmas tree on Halloween. Why? Because according to Homer in America, everything's way too early. And after he says this line, he pulls back his trash can costume to reveal a sticker that reads Ivanka 2028, which means that while unlikely, it is totally possible that we will see Ivanka becoming more and more involved in politics throughout the course of the year, and maybe even announcing an interest in running for office during the next election. But I want to know what you guys think about this crazy prediction, and about the other ones too. Let me know.
Alright, in season 13's Treehouse of Horror episode, one of the segments is called House of Wax. You may remember this one. It's a very clear parody of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Marge upgrades the family home into a highly advanced smart home called the Ultra House 3000. And of course, it's a Treehouse of Horror episode, so the advanced home goes rogue and tries to kill Homer. Obviously, smart homes are a thing now, and on a smaller scale, we even have stuff like Alexa, which we can talk to and like turn on lights and play music for us. But people have talked about some of this technology acting kind of off, listening in on conversations and responding when it wasn't asked, turning lights off without being commanded to. We have tons of videos like this on the channel, check them out after this one. But the idea of a smart home totally glitching out and turning on the homeowners, that's luckily something we haven't seen play out to this degree yet. Again, the year is still young. Now back to Robotic Hannah.
He's just kidding. Or is he? And finally, we have The Simpsons prediction of the Ocean Gate submarine incident, which, yes, I know happened in 2023, but again, it speaks to the accuracy of the show's predictions. In episode 10 of season 17, which was released January 8th of 2006, Homer meets a man who he believes to be his biological father, and together the two embark on a submersible adventure which soon leads to the discovery of an abandoned ship filled with treasure at the bottom of the ocean. Things are going pretty well until the pair's oxygen levels begin running low, and Homer gets his submarine stuck on a coral reef after being separated from the man he believes to be his father. Homer blacks out before waking up days later surrounded by his family. Unfortunately, the members of the Ocean Gate submersible designed to explore the wreck and treasures of the Titanic were not as lucky. But what's even stranger is that one of the Simpsons writers, Mike Reese, was actually a passenger on one of Ocean Gate's successful dives. A dive that cost Reese $100,000 and required him to sign a waiver that mentioned death at least 3 times. Scary stuff, you guys. Alright, first up, we have a prediction that was made by none other than Nostradamus. Yes, Nostradamus, I said it right. And he made this prediction all the way back in 1555 in his book Les Prophéties. Nostradamus predicted that in the year 2024, the king would be driven out by force and replaced by one who will have no mark as king. While some people have interpreted this as Queen Elizabeth being driven out by her death and then replaced by Charles, Charles, who, because of his divorce to Camilla, has no mark as king, others have interpreted it to mean something else. That King Charles will be driven out by his illness or mutinously forced out, and that Prince Harry, who actually gave up his titles and renounced his claim to the throne, will in fact become king in the year 2024. This sounds pretty out there, but considering Nostradamus was right about the Great Fire of London, the French Revolution, the rise of Napoleon, both world wars, and the nuclear destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I wouldn't rule it out completely.
Alright, so Hannah just mentioned Nostradamus, and I'm gonna mention him as well. More specifically about this whole royals drama and how it could play into his prediction about a third world war, or at the very least, war breaking out on a massive scale. So in one of his passages, again, Nostradamus described the King of the Isles being driven out by a force and then replaced by someone without the typical royal attributes. Now, maybe it's a stretch. I'm not even saying I believe in this guy and that he could see into the future, but if you do believe in this sort of thing, it could be possible that there is a connection to this massive war erupting. Maybe the next to take the throne won't even be part of the royal family at all. Maybe an invading force will take things over. Pretty unsettling idea, but if history has taught us anything, it's that this kind of thing used to happen all the time.
Next up, we have the diagnosis of Princess Kate, who had almost the entire world in a chokehold and at the edge of their seats, waiting to catch just a glimpse of her after her scheduled surgery that took place earlier this year. Speculation was flying all over the internet as to why we hadn't seen her, even though she was recovering from an invasive surgery that takes an average person 3 months to recover from. But I guess the public didn't really understand that. Heck, we even did a video on it. But after a photoshopped image of Kate was uploaded to Instagram, social media went into a absolute frenzy, assuming she was dead, that she'd left the prince, other crazy outlandish theories, but it turns out the answer was neither, as last week the princess actually uploaded a video explaining that the reason that she was staying away from the public eye and the reason that she had not wanted to have to come forward and disclose what she was dealing with is because she had been diagnosed with cancer and she wished to deal with it privately with her family, letting her young children know when the time was right. It's unknown what kind of cancer the princess was diagnosed with or what stage it's currently in, but regardless, I do hope that she is able to make a full recovery.
Alright, so Nostradamus has come up in this video, but he's not the only one whose writings have been interpreted to predict some pretty foreboding stuff this year. Baba Vanga as well. And even as someone who doesn't really vibe with stuff like this, I gotta say there are some eerie similarities between their predictions. And again, there's a potential the royal family could play into this prediction. So, Baba Vanga spoke of a quote, formidable dragon rising to prominence, and many have interpreted this to represent the unity and strength of 3 major global players. 3 nations coming together and rising to power and shifting geopolitics. But the thing about power is that people don't really like giving it up willingly. So again, I wonder if this could play into the whole King of the Isles being driven out by force passage. Now, Baba Vanga didn't give a whole lot of detail on the specifics about what this alliance might entail, but the implication is pretty clear. It's the emergence of a force to be reckoned with. And combined with her prediction about turmoil in Europe breaking out in 2024, well, I'll get to that in a minute. But first, back to Hannah.
Next up, we have the prediction that William gets rejected by the public. It's no secret that Prince William is set to take over the throne once his father, King Charles, either passes or steps down, which might happen far sooner than we think. Much like Princess Kate, we don't actually know what kind of cancer King Charles has been diagnosed with or how far along he is stage-wise or treatment-wise. But the worry here is that Prince William will have a rather difficult time making the transition from prince to king, especially considering that he has a sick wife and 3 children to look after. But not only that, the prince has been known to partake in some rather debaucherous activities, including frequenting rather racy nightclubs. Not only that, but there are also many people out there who actually doubt the paternity of Prince William, claiming that he's not actually King Charles's son and therefore has no true claim to the throne. Maybe that's what Nostradamus meant by no mark is king. It could be referring to the fact that William is not actually his biological son. So Take it away, James.
Alright, so expanding on what I was discussing with Baba Vanga, she also predicted that Europe would start going on a downward spiral beginning in 2024. At least, that's an interpretation of some of what she said. According to her, religious extremists will carry out attacks across various parts of Europe, targeting civilians and even political leaders. She even mentioned an attempt on the life of Vladimir Putin, suggesting that someone from Russia might try to kill him. And along with all the violence, Baba Vanga foresaw a complete overhaul of power dynamics in Europe. Significant political shifts leading to the total collapse of the European economy. Oh boy. She even spoke about this mass exodus of Europeans, making Europe feel almost like a ghost town by 2025. Now, this sounds pretty extreme. I mean, I don't know. If none of this pans out, I will not be surprised. But if it does, I'll eat my words. You probably won't see that happen though, because the world will be very different if this all happens, and who knows what the hell I'll be doing if a change like this happens.
So, if Prince William is deemed ineligible to take the throne due to having no blood relation to the king, it would make sense that his children would be deemed ineligible as well. Obviously, that's how bloodlines work. Which would mean that Prince Harry would be called to step up to the plate, which would mean that we would see the first American queen consort as well as the first queen consort of color. But as I said earlier, Harry and Meghan gave up their prince and princess titles, and although they held on to the titles of Duke and Duchess of Sussex, I don't think that translates to either one of them having any interest in Harry taking the throne. So what then? Well, based on the line of succession, one of Harry's children would be next in line to take the throne, and after that, Prince Andrew, Duke of York. I have a feeling this would throw the entirety of the UK into a downward spiral and perhaps even open up the floodgates for a complete reconstruction of government, but I will let James tell you more about that.
Now, this next prediction is gonna sound dark to some. For others, might sound pretty ideal. The complete collapse of the monarchy. There are some that feel that the whole thing needs to go for a number of reasons. Some think it's just outdated and kind of pointless. A lot of people hate the whole class system that's still very much a thing in Britain and see the monarchy as the main source of this. Some just don't like the royals themselves, don't trust the system, and would rather see the whole thing go up in flames. It seems far-fetched that the monarchy would be abolished. It's just been such an institution for such a long time, and it's hard to imagine it going away, but monarchies in other countries have been abolished. It's not out of the realm of possibility. Now, could this happen smoothly? For sure. It could also happen violently. Remains to be seen. Again, these are just predictions.
Next up, we have the many challenges Meghan Markle is predicted to face during this year, 2024. A psychic by the name of Nicholas, who claims to have an inner voice that allows him to predict the futures of well-known figures, has predicted that sometime in 2024, Meghan will experience some form of heartbreak. But the psychic does go on to say that he doesn't believe the heartbreak will be romantic, but instead will have something to do with a royal scandal leading to political and social turmoil, which have all been discussed in this video. For those who doubt his abilities, Nicholas claims to have accurately predicted the spread of mass illness in 2019. You know what I'm talking about. I can't say that on here. The Black Lives Matter movement and Harry and Meghan's appearance on Oprah. So do with that information what you will.
Now, everything I've said up until this point has been pretty grim for the most part, and this next point, it's no different. I mean, you clicked on, again, Dark Royal Family Predictions. You knew what you were getting into. So far, I've painted a picture of the monarchy collapsing for whatever reason. Maybe an invading force taking over, chaos and turmoil breaking out in Europe. While all of this unrest would have ramifications for the entire world. If one of the biggest superpowers in the Western world fell, just think of the shockwaves it would send throughout the Commonwealth. At the end of the day, who's to say what's going to happen? You know, maybe things will all work out fine and you'll look back on this video pointing and laughing at how wrong we both are. Maybe that's already what you're doing. Or maybe you'll look back on this video and a tear will roll down your unwashed cheeks as you remember a time where the world seemed simpler, where you weren't being chased by roaming bands of mutated swamp rats in a desolate post-apocalyptic nightmare. Is 2024 the end? We're talking a possible third war, turmoil in the royal palace, and the coming of an apocalyptic comet that's just a couple months away. If even one of these predictions on the list comes to pass, it certainly could mean the end of the world. So in just a couple months, a comet will be passing Earth, the Devil Comet. And just to start things off on an ominous note, one of Nostradamus' passages states, "There will come a horrible slaughter of people and animals. At once we will see vengeance, 100 hands, thirst, famine, when the comet will pass." So what is this supposed comet? Well, all this stuff is open very heavily to interpretation, of course, but seeing as the Pons-Brooks Comet, ominously nicknamed the Devil Comet, will be passing Earth for the first time in over 70 years in June, who knows, maybe this summer will be full of slaughter, vengeance, hunger, thirst, and a bunch of hands, I guess. As for why all this chaos erupts, it won't have anything to do with the comet itself. We'll be able to see it pass us by, but it's nowhere close enough to cause any harm. We'll need telescopes to actually see it. So it seems like all the death and famine is going to be caused by something else. And hey, you're in luck, because I have 9 possible causes for disaster coming your way. Through the death of a very old pontiff, a Roman of good age will be elected. Of him it will be said that he weakens his see, but long will he sit and in biting activity. That passage from Nostradamus has led interpreters to believe a new pope will be taking over in 2024. Pope Francis has been having some health issues as of late, and he is 87, so it wouldn't really be that surprising. Now, a pope of good age, that doesn't sound too bad. A young, hip pope, chews gum, wears sunglasses, says some sick slang. You know, that's what cool young people do, right? Could be good to have a pope of good age, but the weakens his see part doesn't sound very promising. I don't really know what the hell weakens his see means. Does it mean the guy's gonna like go blind, lose his vision? Does it just vaguely mean he's gonna suck? Well, either way, it doesn't sound good, and the long sitting and biting activity part seems to mean he's gonna be the pope for a long time. As for what biting activity means, well, I think this new pope is gonna be a vampire. He'll just enjoy the activity of biting people. Let's talk about the great naval battle. Nostradamus wrote that a quote red adversary will become pale with fear, putting the great ocean in dread. What does he mean by this red adversary? Well, a lot of followers of Nostradamus's writings have interpreted this to mean China, mainly because of the country's increasing tensions with Taiwan. Perhaps the seer foresaw a naval battle between China and Taiwan, and it's hard not to imagine other countries joining in on the party. Maybe this naval battle will turn into a full-on war, a world war perhaps? More on that in a bit. The great ocean becoming a battlefield may not be the sole cause of the end of the world, but it might kick things off. Of course, there are other possibilities as well, like turmoil in the royal palace. Nostradamus also refers to the king of the isles being, quote, driven out by force, and that a new king shall be anointed who for a long time will appease the earth. Now, appease the earth? I mean, that sounds nice, right? I think the earth is due for some appeasing. Well, hold your horses, because apparently this new king won't be coming along until after a war. How long will this war last? I don't know. I don't have fancy superpowers like Nostradamus. I'm just a regular old Joe. As for what the war is, though, well, perhaps it's part of the whole China-Taiwan thing. Maybe it's an entirely different war altogether. Main reason people have been bringing up this specific passage lately, though, is because we haven't had a king on the British throne for a long time, and with King Charles's old age combined with some of the health problems he's had as of late, it seems like there's a good chance he may not be on the throne for very long. As for the driven out by force part, will he step down just not being able to do the task anymore? Will an invading force seize power in Britain? We'll just have to wait and see. Here's something else to look forward to. Nostradamus also predicted an increase in climate disasters for 2024, with one passage stating, "The dry earth will grow more parched, and there will be great floods when it's seen. So that's really great. There have been more heat waves in recent years, whether you subscribe to global warming or not. It is pretty clear that Earth is now warmer than it has been in the past, which has led some interpreters to see that Earth will grow more parched line as, well, the Earth drying out. Lots of ice melting and huge floods swallowing up large chunks of land, leading to, of course, more chaos, death, and suffering. By the way, folks, what way would you rather the world end? Natural disasters like this, or something more like a zombie apocalypse or a devastating world war? Cast your votes down in the comments. I'll tally them all up, and the winners will receive nothing. Speaking of climate disasters, though, earthquakes also come into play, and some even think that the passage I just mentioned before may have already played out right at the start of this year in Japan, when a huge earthquake rocked the western coastline on New Year's. Hundreds of people lost their lives, homes were destroyed, there was also a tsunami, a massive fire in Majima City that took even more lives, and people were crammed into shelters where the chances of sickness spreading was highly increased. In the early days of the disaster, food and water supplies were also short. Awful. And being in that situation, something I wouldn't wish on anyone, must have felt like the end of the world, but I do find it pretty silly that some people are connecting a disaster that happened in Japan in 2024 to a prophecy written by a man in the 1500s. I mean, it's not like this was the only awful disaster that happened in the 500 plus years since the guy was alive. Maybe Nostradamus was foreseeing a far worse calamity that's still yet to happen. Maybe he saw into a future disaster that already happened closer to when he was alive, or people are just reading too much into things. What do you think? Share those thoughts. Again, in line with natural disasters, this could be connected to the famine the seer predicted for the future, writing of a, quote, very great famine through pestiferous wave. Could this be referring to tsunamis wreaking havoc on agriculture and causing starvation? I say that because of the wave part, but pestiferous, I mean, that could also mean the famine might be caused by some sort of sickly thing that causes crops to decay and die. Not exactly sure what this would be. Maybe some form of gas used in one of the wars I mentioned before, toxic radiation in the atmosphere or something, or maybe it's more biblical, like an apocalyptic swarm of locusts that damages all the crops. Point is, I've brought up famine a couple times on this list now, so if folks really are right in their approximations about the timeline of these predictions, we're in for some grumbling stomachs in the very near future. Hoard all the canned beans and Pop-Tarts you can while you still have a chance. Alright, I mentioned a third world war earlier, so I gotta deliver. Yes, another fun one. Nostradamus foresaw a third world war breaking out 79 years after the second one. And for those of you who didn't pay attention in history class, World War II wrapped up in 1945, meaning 2024 is the year this third war in the trilogy is supposed to release. Well, will we recover from this one? Will we come out of it stronger and more unified as a species? Will good triumph over evil? It's hard to say. The third in the trilogy is usually when things drop in quality. They jump the shark and they just plain suck, right? Terminator is a classic. Terminator 2, one of the best action movies ever made. Terminator 3, we don't talk about that one. I bet some of you were probably just like, Terminator 3, oh, Terminator 3, you didn't even remember that movie existed probably. Mad Max, awesome. Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, one of the best action movies ever made. So maybe instead of good triumphing over evil, World War III will be the one that finally does us in. Nostradamus warned of a, quote, celestial fire when the lights of Mars will go out, end quote. Now, what does the destruction of Mars have to do with Earth? Well, it's possible that the passage isn't referring to the destruction of Mars itself, but maybe a failed mission to Mars. But now we've all heard of Elon Musk's SpaceX mission to Mars, set to launch in the very near future, but there are also two California-based companies, Relativity Space and Impulse Space, who are apparently teaming up to launch a mission to the Red Planet as early as this year. I'm not entirely convinced, but if that does happen, things may not go very smoothly. And I mean, like, forget Nostradamus' ominous mention of Mars. A manned trip to Mars in 2024 is almost certain to fail, right? I mean, I don't gotta be clairvoyant to guess that. We haven't even set foot on the moon since Apollo 17 in 1972. Now, granted, it's not like there's much going on the moon. We went, we walked around a bit. Well, what's left to do? But the point is, the practice just isn't there. Finally though, we have the most ominous sounding passage on the list. The Antichrist very soon annihilates the three. 27 years his war will last. The unbelievers are dead, captive, exiled, with BLOOD, human bodies, water, and red hail covering the earth. Now, if that doesn't sound like the end of the world, then I don't know what does. I guess the 27 years thing kinda answers the question of how long the war will last though. Now, what is the Antichrist really referring to here? Does it literally mean Satan is gonna rise up from the pits of hell and unleash a war between demon and man right here on Earth? Honestly, if the world is gonna end, I think that would be the climax of all climaxes. Better to burn out than to fade away, right?